Overthinkers of Reddit, what unlikely scenario actually came true that you were completely prepared for because you are an overthinker? When my wife and I were getting married and looking for a place for ceremony, we have found this beautiful but quite remote garden. We were signing the contract for the event and I kept thinking that it was quite remote, so I asked, how much time does it take for the ambulance to get here? I became the laughing stock of both families. My then future mother-in-law, who was present at the meeting, literally fell down from the chair laughing. The wedding organizer remembered it for weeks, telling about it everyone we met. My dad ended every sentence with, but maybe you need an ambulance for that. My wife was making siren noises when I was saying something we disagreed on. Every family dinner, all the aunts and uncles were checking if the ambulance was present. You name it. The entire package. Still, I couldn't get rid of this weird feeling. It would have taken over an hour for the ambulance to get to the garden. After a few weeks I ended up paying a private ambulance to be present at the wedding. Fast forward to the ceremony. As my wife literally walks down the aisle, at the back of the garden I see two paramedics running with a stretcher and my dad squeezing my hand whispering, "That's not of your goddamn business, let them to take care of it." What happened was that one of our older guests got a heart attack and almost died at ceremony. Was saved by the private ambulance. Ever since then, when my wife tells me that I'm overthinking, I just do the siren noise. Edit well. Thanks for the awards everybody. Glad you liked the story. I promise you that I was tired of winning after that. They never heard the end of it, but all the laughs were in good spirit. I apologized to the guy's kids for ruining their inheritance plans, and he was saying that the service was so boring that he preferred to take his chances with the heart attack. So we had a few more laughs and trolling. Some of you are asking how much did the ambulance cost? I don't remember as it was many years ago, and I may not be from your country. But does it matter? Can one really put a price on the "I told you" so you can use any time you want with your mother-in-law? I was once driving on the highway behind a car with a couple of kayaks strapped to the roof. My anxious brain kept saying, what if they fall off the car, Final Destination style? I tried to convince myself that it was an irrational fear, but the anxiety got the better of me, and I decided to change lanes and make some distance. About 30 seconds later, cue kayaks, they both slip off the roof and go rolling around the highway. Luckily no one was hurt, but man, that did not help my anxiety at all. Edit to address some comments. I figured I was overthinking, since I don't know anyone else who gets nervous or avoids driving behind cars with loads, but I see now that maybe my behavior wasn't so weird. Apparently a lot of you have seen falling kayaks on the highway. I don't think this is the same exact incident as any of the ones you guys have described. From comments about how to properly tie down a kayak, I think these were not properly secured. I don't think they were tied to the bumpers. I'm an amateur clarinetist. I've played in the local orchestra and the like. My son was in the high school band, also played clarinet. Prior to a football game, at the warm-up area, he called me as I was about to head to the game, saying that someone in his section had a problem with their instrument. So did I have a loaner? Now the thing about being a clarinet player is that everyone you know calls you every time they see a cheap plastic clarinet for sale at a garage sale or the like. So over the years, especially when my son was in junior and senior high, when I saw one of these for $50 or $100 I grabbed it. Didn't happen every day, but at the peak of my collection I had a couple of beta plastic clarinets in addition to the pretty good wooden one my son played, and Lord knows I wouldn't trust anyone with my good clarinets in BB&A I used in the orchestra. So I grabbed both of these plastic jobs, which actually played okay, and brought them. I pulled the one I thought was the better of the two out of the car and gave it to my son's friend. Meanwhile, he says, hey, another person ran into a problem. And I got the second clarinet out of the car. How many clarinets do you have? Was my son's question. It was a proud moment. Edit wow. Thanks for all these awards and upvotes. It helps confirm I really am bananas. This was at 9 years old. We had driven home and seen the beginning wisps of smoke for the California Cedar fire in 2003. Naturally, I assumed the worst and packed up all my clothes and spent about an hour making a travel cage for my guinea pigs. I tied their water bottle to the side so they could drink, packed up their food and their favorite furniture just in case. I then spent the next few hours monitoring the fire on the news and out in the distance from our window, periodically asking my parents if we needed to evacuate. At some point in the night the fire sped up like crazy and was literally on the hillside across the street. I went into my parents' room and said, the fire is across the street, are you sure we shouldn't evacuate? At this point we all went crazy grabbing important documents and supplies, and as we were about to lock the doors and drive I realized I forgot my guinea pigs. My parents told me it was too late and I didn't have time to grab them, but when I cried and explained I had them packed up, I was able to grab them and go. The house ended up okay thanks to a neighbor putting out embers before they took, but we were gone long enough my pigs wouldn't have made it. TLDR, helped save my family and pets from a fire because I was an anxious child. When I was 11, I always kept approximately 12 to 15 of some combination of pens, pencils, and markers in my pant pocket. Just liked having options and never knew what I was going to need to write on. Sometimes got some side eye from other kids though. Cut to at a weekend camp with a bunch of kids. I'm participating in a sort of scavenger hunt race thing. At one point our teams hits this task where everyone has to draw or write something. Don't really remember. But there's only 2 pens, about 10 people per team, and another team just showed up. With 1 pen assigned to each team, it's going slow until you get a pen. You get a pen. Everybody gets a pen. Our team screams through the task because we can all write simultaneously while the other team's left plodding along with their 1 pen. We eventually win. Who's weird now? Edit. For those concerned about cheating, I believe the lack of pens was oversight, but the event planners, not a deliberate means of handicapping teams. There was a staff members monitoring that particular station and they didn't intervene. Our victory was sanctioned and still stands. Edit 2. Some people have expressed concern over the possibility of my getting impaled by all these writing utensils. Rest assured that this 100% has happened to me. I have absolutely impaled legs and fingertips multiple times. It was terrible. I've never told anyone this, but when I was in middle school and going through puberty, I used to be terrified of getting a random boner and my fly being down accidentally. Like, I would be up in front of class and then randomly get an erection and it would just pop out of my fly in front of the whole class lol. It's making me laugh just typing this out. You know that episode of South Park where Jimmy keeps getting random stuffies? That was basically my life. Usually I would just tuck it in my waistband and wait for the storm to settle, but I still had the huge fear of it popping out of my fly because I forgot to zip it up. So what did I do? I started wearing my boxers backwards so that even if I forgot to zip up my fly, my sklarn wouldn't be exposed. It was a pain to use the urinals, but honestly I got used to it pretty quickly. Flash forward a couple months, and I was at the movies with a big gathering of people. It was basically a big group of girls and my group of guy friends. Each guy and girl paired up and made sure to sit next to each other. I was paired with the girl I had a huge crush on. We shared a popcorn and soda, and it was a huge moment for me. Briefly into the movie, I got one of those damn random boners and I quickly but discreetly stood up and did the all waistband tuck. When I sat back down, I could feel it pop out through my zipper. Thankfully, my backwards boxers kept it from saying hello to my date, but I still panicked and had to cover up in a hurry. She noticed, but I think we can all agree that a 6th grade boy's erect penis hiding under a layer of underwear is better than just sprouting out bare in the middle of a crowded movie theater. Also, she never said anything to her friends about it. Shout out Stephanie for not mocking me with her friends. My boyfriend, who has zero history of seizures, narrowly escaped dying from one because my overthinking led me to break into his house when he didn't answer the phone. My overthinking had begun a few nights prior. He mentioned that he bit his tongue in his sleep and woke up with a bloody pillow and sore mouth, but he had no memory of it happening. That for some reason led my overthinking brain to question back, quote, wow, did he have a seizure and not realize it? He has zero history of seizures, and we had been together multiple years. didn't live together, but spent nights together, and I had never seen a hint of a seizure. But for some reason, this stuck in my mind. Fast forward 2 days. We usually don't hang out in the morning, because he likes to sleep in late, but on this day we had an appointment to go see a specific dog at the shelter I was thinking of adopting. He wouldn't answer the phone that morning. I called multiple times before I went to his place, but he never picked up. I started getting a bad feeling, but quelled the "he's having a seizure" thought, because that was clearly so unlikely. Meanwhile, making an action plan for that very scenario. I got to his house and he wouldn't answer, so in a completely not me crazy girlfriend move, I climbed over his fence. Luckily his door was unlocked. I found him unconscious and unresponsive, lying in his back with the sticky remnants of foam all around his mouth. I jumped into action. I rolled him on his side to help curb aspiration, put a pillow under his shoulder to keep him in that position, and called the ambulance. Had I not hopped the fence to get in, had I not driven over when he didn't pick up the phone, had we not had plans to meet up hours earlier than we usually did, he would have been dead by lunch. His kidneys were already shutting down by the time he reached the If he had never mentioned biting his tongue in his sleep, I don't think I would have been overthinking at all. No crazy worries about seizures would have pushed me to go over and find him. Turns out to be a weird brain disease that's bizarrely endemic to New Mexico, kind of cerebral cavernous malformations. Several days later, after we got home from the hospital, I got a call from a friend who said the dog, against all odds, was still at the shelter, as in the very dog we were supposed to be seeing that day. I had given up hope on getting her, pushed it out of my priorities while he was hospitalized, but they had forgotten to take down my 24-hour hold sign on her cage, so no one inquired about her. She's now our miracle dog and is the sweetest animal I've ever owned. My boyfriend wouldn't be alive today if we hadn't made an appointment to meet her. I found a nickel-sized lump on my 15-month-old daughter's temple, freaked out, obsessed over it, researched it exhaustively, and concluded it was a dermoid cyst that had worn through the skull. I was told by a pediatrician that it was a bone bruise that would fix itself over the course of 3 to 6 months. No imaging was needed, and I shouldn't make an appointment at the children's hospital because it would resolve on its own. I got an x-ray done anyway and the radiologist confirmed every one of my suspicions, but the pediatrician still said to wait and see, because that's what you do with dermoid cysts, and it was definitely not through the skull despite what the radiologist said. Made an appointment at the hospital anyway, and the surgeon swore up and down that, although it was a dermoid cyst as I'd suspected, it would not be through the skull, since in all his years of practice it never had been. Well, guess what? It was through the skull, and it was pressing on the membrane between the skull and the brain, a hair's breadth from breaking the membrane, or pressing on the brain. A couple more weeks of waiting, and my daughter could have had seizures, a brain infection, lasting damage. I overthought it, and now she's a happy, healthy 3-year-old. Honestly, this whole pandemic, I have struggled with severe germophobia my whole life, and as a little kid, I found out what a pandemic was and was really scared of the idea of one happening at some point within my lifetime. The more I read up on pandemics and their history as I grew up and lived with that fear, the more likely I came to feel it was. When COVID was just a thing in Wuhan, I had heard it could be transmissible for weeks before it showed any signs and symptoms, and in the modern day of fast, worldwide travel constantly occurring on a mass scale, I right away felt like there's no way this thing won't become as uncontained as possible in no time. I right away started to say that it was going to spread worldwide, be a serious issue, and that people here, in the States, wouldn't handle it well, or act reasonably, and would panic and buy everything off of the shelves at first, and then immediately not take it seriously at all, and call you weak if you do take it seriously. Everyone I know laughed at me, rolled their eyes, and told me I'm a crazy germaphobe. And then literally every single last detail of every single thing that's happened here in the US, from how bad it got exactly to the early panic buying days to the politicizing of the virus and the way Trump used that to his advantage to how long it's been around, and how things might start wrapping up and getting back to normal a bit if we can vaccinate, all happened exactly the way I called it play by play like a year and some months ago. so I don't know if I'd call everything that's happened back quote unlikely really, but at the mental level, and even partially the level of resources slash taking precautions the experts tell us to take well before the experts began to tell us to take them, I already had masks slash etc, and was social distancing before that was a back quote thing here. I've kinda been gearing up for this my whole life in some ways. All the teachers at the middle school I taught at knew I was a pack rat, and one day a kid split his pants and the school counselor came to me and said, "Mr. the Hog Dog, would you happen to have a pair of sweats or gym pants in your truck?" Yep. So the kid spent the rest of the day in a pair of nylon pants I had behind my seat. He is lucky, because if he didn't fit he would have spent the rest of the day in a white disposable coverall I had in case I had car trouble in nice clothes. Icing on the cake, it was a student I really liked who was super helpful to other kids and teachers, so it was nice to do something nice for him. I also carried a Swiss Army brand soft side briefcase, yard sale find, stuffed, and it had a few of each size of battery. One day Phil Necro and two Braves players were there for an assembly, and Phil's mic battery was dying, so I sprinted upstairs to my classroom, grabbed a 9V from my bag, then basically rolled across the panel and switched out his battery and got back to the PA avoiding getting on TV news cameras. Was at one of those trampoline parks with my kid when I look over and see several of the workers attending to an elderly lady sitting on the floor. Turns out she'd taken a shot to the forehead somehow and was bleeding profusely. They were trying to help with paper towels. Well, I'd taken a free local stop the bleed class just in case, and since have kept supplies in my truck. Asked if they needed some gauze and a bandage, went and got it, and brought it back. I told the guy, "Now if one piece of gauze fills up," he interrupted, "take it off and put on a new one." I said, "No, you put another one over top that one, but leave the bottom one there." He said, "Well, you know more than I do. Come over and help." We were able to get her patched up. Edit. Thanks for all the karma. If anyone wants to take a 90-minute stop the bleed class, they're free and likely in your local area. Could save a life. Search for one here. https://cms.bleedingcontrol.org/stay safe out there guys. A year and a half ago, my wife was doing the Susan G. Komen 3-day walk, and she was staying in a house that was rented. She had just finished day 2, and her body was essentially done at that point. In the middle of the night she woke up with severe sweating and dizziness. She started vomiting, and by the next morning, didn't feel much better. I get the call, "Can you come take me to urgent care?" Oh shit, this is my wife we are talking about. Toughest lady I've ever known, never asks for help with anything. Strong as an ox, and about as stubborn as one too. So when she asks me to take her to the doctor/hospital, I'm out the door in seconds. I drive down to the house to get her. Before we leave, I remember she told me she vomited last night. Well, I'd been there the night before to bring our daughter to see her before she fell ill, and I'd played in the sand at the beach with her with some of the beach toys the house had on hand. So I just grab a bucket in case she needs to throw up in it. We make it to urgent care without incident, but I brought that damn bucket in either way, because I'll be damned if something goes down. Sure enough, she gets the urge to throw up while we're there, and wouldn't you know it, the bathrooms were both occupied. Bucket to the rescue. I felt like a goddamn hero. Planned out what I would do if I were ever exiting a freeway and the off-ramp were backed up, and I saw a car coming at me too fast to stop. Unfortunately for me, my plan execution was not flawless, so I did get hit, but I prevented the cars in front of me from becoming involved. Copying the story from my reply below. My plan was to steer onto the shoulder. Just before it happened I could see that I was in my planned situation, so I was waiting for space to open in front, so I could keep maneuvering space when I saw the guy coming through the windows of the car behind me. I had a secondary plan, pulled the handbrake, turned the tires towards the shoulder, and put both feet on the brake. He came through the SUV behind me, which I got to watch in slow motion through my rear view, and I got hit by both. The SUV pitted to my left, and he came through on my right. I had opened enough space that my car didn't hit anyone, but I broke my finger when I pulled the handbrake and smashed my knee pretty good when I hit the brakes. Apparently it's the wrong thing to do, because all the energy stopped with my car. It's better to go limp and let your car hit the next one, but that hadn't occurred to me. All that stiffness twerked my back pretty hard when I absorbed all the impact. Also seems kind of a douche move to save yourself by smashing people in front, but the physics does back it up. I was in an abusive marriage. I had started planning a way to leave, but had an emergency go right now bag in case it got really bad. It had spare clothes, a card to a bank account my ex-husband didn't have access to, and didn't know I had, some cash, several weeks of my meds, a brief medical history with DR's info in case I was hurt and had to go to a hospital, etc. I hid it in the spare tire wheel space of my car. The top layer was just clothing that I had in some shopping bags. It looked like I had bought clothes without him knowing. Anyway, he found it one day. Luckily, he just took the shopping bag out and got real pissed off. Left everything else. Anyway, I never got to use it for myself because he got arrested, thank God. But afterwards I noticed a friend had the look of being abused. It was pretty clear what was happening. After gently approaching her, she acknowledged that she was being abused, but didn't feel like she could leave. So I helped her hook up with a domestic violence victim advocate, but I also had her change my name in her phone to a pizza shop. I made her a Go Right Now bag for her and put it in my car. 30 days later I got a call for a large cheese pizza with extra sauce. I called 911, drove to her house, beat the cops there, and heard her screaming bloody murder. I knocked the window out and climbed in. Saw her husband with a knife with blood all over it. I just ran and grabbed her, unlocked the door, got her into the car, had the phone on me the whole time. I had a first aid kit with a ton of wound gauze, so I just pressed that in and waited as the husband tried to take out the window. Finally I told the 911 operator that I was gonna drive down a ways. The cops showed up, arrested the husband, took my friend to the hospital, saved her life, and since her home was a crime scene she needed the Go Right Now bag. I keep a generic one in my car at all times. I've used more than one for more than a few women, and one for a man. Once you've been through it, you can see it. I never want to be unprepared. Just in case. Edit. Thank you for the award. I encourage those who are not using the free awards from Reddit on mobile and spending money to donate to a domestic violence victims advocacy group in your area, like a women's or men's shelter, or donate to a violence against women awareness groups that provides awareness resources worldwide and advocacy contacts like the Pixel Project. Edit. Apparently you get free Reddit awards on all platforms now. I did not know that. Thanks for the information. I still recommend donating funds to local advocacy groups or to awareness groups that can get people connected to the right advocacy groups worldwide. I'm Asian, so my default is to overthink, especially when I'm on a field trip, holiday, etc. Essentially it's just what if I need X, Y, Z just in case. One time, while I was living in another sea country, I went on a middle school field trip with my, mostly white, classmates. Side note, in most sea public bathrooms, bidets are the norm, toilet paper is not. But in this particular country, even the bidets are not encouraged to be used. So toilet paper is a luxury during trips. At the hotel we stayed at, my classmates made fun of me for taking 3 rolls of toilet paper from the hotel's bathroom. They were embarrassed and reported me to the teacher in charge, who told them off for wasting her time. I told them they were going to regret laughing at me, but they continued to mock me for overthinking. Cue to the bus trip back, and a couple of them had diarrhea, and guess who was the only one able to provide enough toilet paper? You bet yours I made them pay me for toilet paper. Per square course, fuck you guys for laughing at me. I used to keep a spoon in my purse. This was in high school and my friend put a spoon in my purse one day as a joke. I decided to leave it there, just in case, and my friend thought it was hilarious. It became a regular thing for her to check my purse every few weeks to see if the spoon was still in there. Well, one day I decided to spend some extra cash and get a small strawberry ice cream at the end of lunch. I had already bought it and made my way over to the silverware rack. When I saw it, the clean spoon holder was empty. With it being the end of lunch on a day when the cafeteria had served chili, all of the clean spoons had been wiped out. I was about to feel very sad for myself and try to decide if a fork was acceptable for eating ice cream when I remembered the purse spoon. After a quick wipe with a napkin, the spoon was clean and ready for me to use. Of course my friend was with me and could barely hold herself together while I uttered aloud my love for the spoon in between bites of ice cream. I always carry 2 travel toothbrushes and a travel size toothpaste, pack of baby wipes and deodorant. When traveling a bit further I also bring a change of shirt, a small towel, some tampons, pads and extra hairbands, even though I can just barely wear mine up. This is all because I grew up as the oldest of 4 kids, and looking after a child 11 years younger makes you prepared. Anyway, I was on a school trip with my master's course to London. It suddenly was pouring it down, and one of the girls had a white shirt on, and it got see-through. So I pulled out one of my many weird graphic tees and handed it over. To help further I pulled out a small face towel I keep in my bag and let her wipe down. I'm a tall, 5'10" and broad girl, so I just pulled my coat open and kind of caged in this poor 5'2" girl and looked away as she changed in this makeshift changing room. The shirt was huge on her, but it helped keep the cool air off the tops of her legs. Another time I had pre-booked and sorted out my train journey, bought snacks and a portable charger for a short 30 minutes journey, which quickly turned into 4 hours because of an accident and delays, and further, I was set and was able to give the family with 2 kids across the walkway of me some fruit. I had apples and some tangerines and allowed the kids to use my sketchbook to draw in. It was a ratty old thing. Overthinking and over-preparing can be tedious but worth it when it comes to situations. I want to add a trigger warning to this before I dive in. To protect those who have dealt with abuse growing up, my dad really instilled the fear of not being prepared in my head. If you have ever watched Freaks and Geeks, the dad at the dinner table recounting someone he knew who died as a result of their actions was a pretty spot on impression. It extended beyond don't run with scissors to don't carry things on your lap when you're in a car or you'll be cut in half. Walk opposite of traffic, so if someone tries to kidnap you, you can kick their door in and run away. I instinctively catalog items when entering a room based on what would be a good weapon and have had to familiarize myself with preserving evidence. The last one is what came in handy. Unfortunately, one of the worst case scenarios befell our family 2 years ago. My oldest daughter disclosed that she had been molested by my then Phil. I went into full autopilot here, took my daughter to a safe room, had family pick up my dog and youngest daughter, made sure she didn't wash her hands. When she had to use the restroom, I asked her not to wipe. We didn't change her clothes. We didn't have her brush her teeth. The DNA evidence they were able to collect off of her put him in prison and will keep him there. Surprisingly, this has helped my overthinking. We all are getting a lot of therapy now, and I've started to learn that it's okay to not be for everything. Sometimes life sucks, and most of the time it's completely out of our control. I know the lyrics to precisely one rap song, the Biggie Smalls / Millie Cyrus mashup Party and Bullshit in the USA. I just like the song, but I'm also markedly Caucasian. One year for my birthday, my friend got us tickets to the Star Wars themed pop-up bar in New York City and we went in costume. I was wearing screen accurate GD robes, boots, belt, fancy custom saber, the whole deal. As a result, the staff kept feeding us drink tokens to be merry and entertaining for the normal guests. While my friend the Ewok was grinding up on Darth Vader, I'm drunkenly bopping next to a breakdancing stormtrooper, both cast, when lo and behold, the DJ starts playing Party and Bullshit in the USA. I start singing along, tapping the stormtrooper's breastplate. Had better throw my vest on my chest, and the guy pulls me over to the DJ booth. Between verses, they set up a mic really quick and pass it to me. I fumble a little to get into it and then crush the last 2 verses while passing the mic to some girl who was standing next to me so she can sing the Millie chorus. Anyway, that's the story of how I trained 4 years to drunkenly rap Biggie Smalls in front of 100 strangers while dressed like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Maybe not overthinking, but I saw a news story about a kid who fell on an escalator and died. They had the obligatory 6-second clip of someone saying what you should do if you ever see someone in that situation, and I filed it away because it seemed terrifying. About 7 years later, a little kid in front of me slipped on the escalator leaving a DC metro station. His mom was gingerly trying to free his pant leg and shoelaces. I spazzed out as we approached the top of the escalator and yanked the kid up and away from the rail with my forearms under his armpits. Shoe and pant leg remained stuck, but the actual kid was fine, albeit half barefoot and missing most of a pant leg. My heart rate spikes like crazy just retelling the story, and I bet if I hadn't watched the local news, I would not have had the clarity to realize what to do in that moment on account of the adrenaline. I also self-administered the Heimlich using the back of a kitchen chair when I was around 10. I tried to swallow too big of a piece of steak wrapped in bacon, and no one at the cookout recognized the mind I'm choking signal we learned in first aid. I hit that chair like with a flying leap, like I was Jimmy Snooker, and the food popped out. I distinctly remember our dog grabbing the food from the ground almost immediately and being really happy with me. A little backstory first. I've always had bad anxiety when it comes to relationships. So much so that it has ruined most of them. I just get paranoid of something happening, even if it's only because they hadn't texted me back in an hour or something lol. Like, all the worst scenarios, cheating, not liking me anymore, and worse, something bad happening to them. Anyway, once, it happened. It was 2013. I was dating this girl in college. Nothing too serious. It was summer, and we lived about 2 hours apart. When we weren't in session, we both lived in the dorms when we were, so we only got to see each other a couple of times that summer. This time, however, the day before one of the times we were supposed to hang out, I texted her to confirm our plans. We arranged to meet at a local Walmart at 2 p.m. the next day. She confirmed and told me she was at a party, so she probably wouldn't communicate much for the rest of the night. I didn't think anything of it and went about by night. The next day rolled around. I texted her that morning. I didn't get a response, but figured she was still asleep, so I went ahead and started driving. She didn't respond the whole way there. I start freaking out about the usual stuff. It went from her standing me up, to her not liking me anymore, to her canceling the plans, to the inevitable something terrible has happened to her. This was a normal thing for me, so I just kept trying to brush it off. Anyway, I get to the Walmart about half an hour early. I texted her saying that I was there. Nothing. I scrolled Facebook and all that. Still nothing. I waited and waited. It was finally about 3 when I gave up and tried to call her to try to get an immediate response. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I didn't know exactly where she lived, because we'd always meet somewhere, else I probably would have driven. So I call. Nothing. Call back. Nothing. I waited a few minutes and decided I'd try to call one more time before I headed back home. This time, someone answered. It was her sister. She was crying. She told me that the girl I was dating, we weren't official yet, had died the night before. Her and her friend were driving to get food after the party. They were both drunk. They got into a single car accident on a winding road and flew off an embankment. The girl died instantly. The friend, who had been driving, was unscathed. It really faked me up. Like I said, we weren't too serious, so it wasn't as bad as if we'd been together a long time, but still. No one wants to hear that. I felt so bad, not just for myself, but for her family and friends. I sent flowers, because they weren't having a public funeral on account of her being pretty mangled. Anyway, yeah, I can't say I was prepared for it, even though my mind went there, but it was one of my worst fears come true. Something I'd thought about 1,000 times in other relationships before and since, and it never happened, but for the one time, it did. I'd always been anxious in relationships before, but it got way worse. I just kept telling myself that it was a one-time thing, and the odds were that it wouldn't happen again. There was a good half a decade I couldn't make any relationship last more than a month, because I was too anxious. I think it'd probably be better now, but alas, I haven't had the opportunity to date anyone for the last 3 years or so. Anyway, it faking succeeded. 3 drunk dads from Alabama came over to confront me because I asked a woman at their pool party that they pick up their food plates scattered around the pool. My autistic son has a tendency to throw things like that in the pool. It was a fairly large group with a lot of drunk dudes. Her reaction made me imagine several of them coming up to me, but not to clean up their plates. So I made a plan, grabbed a pipe resting against the wall, inflated a huge smiley face circular raft. Thankfully the pool had an air compressor or that would not have been an option, and put it out in front of me to hide the pipe and serve as a distraction. Then 3 of them showed up. The mouth demanded to know what my problem was. I calmly explained that I have a mentally handicapped son who does not know better than to throw food in a pool, that I needed help cleaning it all up so that he did not do that and get the pool shut down for cleaning. That appeal to their sense seemed to work a bit, but their posture was still off. So I blatantly called them out as the 3 amigas here to beat up the retarded kid's dad. A direct hit to the heart of the Southern Baptist male ego, so suggest that they were bullying because of special needs. They backed off just as I was tightening my grip on the pipe behind old Smiley, waiting for one that couldn't, missing up an opportunity to fight. They wandered back to their party instead. Never cleaned up their faking mess. At the start of the pandemic here there were rumors going around that we might go into lockdown. Of course, it was only going to be for 2 weeks, and then everything would be over. No big deal. The days. I was in the final stages of my data analysis for my PhD, meaning once that was done I'd no longer need to go to the lab for anything. Also I needed access to the lab for the programs to actually do the analysis. Well, one night I'm getting all these messages from family and friends. Secrets out. Thanks to emergency responders who got an early heads up. We're locking down tomorrow. It's 10:30 p.m. but I grabbed some extra bags and bus it to the lab. I was there until around 4 a.m. finishing every possible analysis I could think I might evenly remotely need for my dissertation. Then when I finally finished I packed up everything of mine from the lab with the assumption I'd never make it back, and then had to walk home with it all since it was too late for the bus. We did lock down the next day and the campus was closed. Of course, it was supposed to only be 2 weeks, so my friends were all laughing at my panicked venture, saying it was ridiculous to think I needed to do the analysis as soon as possible and walk home. So late carrying all that stuff. Well, it's been over a year now. Guess what campus and lab still aren't open? Guess who never made it back to the lab? I even ended up moving back home, far out of the city. Not a concern, thanks to my apparent overthinking about the lockdown. Just a few days ago, a younger friend is staying with me because she is on new medication for depression and anxiety and knew she might have unpleasant side effects. Sure enough, starts the new meds that were prescribed by a psychiatrist and she starts having horrible symptoms. When they don't fade after a couple days I suggest we try to contact her psychiatrist. Can't get a hold of her. We call her GP. He says not to worry about it. I'm still convinced these are not normal, so we call telehealth. They say go to the though they always do. We go, wait for hours, see a doctor who laughs it off and says these are normal. Next day I call the pharmacist. She says it seems odd, but to stay the course if the doc says. I'm still concerned, and after researching, confirm my fear that she has symptoms of serotonin syndrome, so I take her to the local mental health and addiction hospital. They say her vitals are normal, but that she needs to check at a normal hospital because they can't do all the tests there. I keep insisting something is wrong and finally get them to call an ambulance to take her to yet another hospital. Turns out I was right, and she was going into serotonin shock. They treated her all night, and she is still recovering, though now home with me. Left untreated it causes brain damage or death. My fiancée, this girl and several doctors all thought I was overreacting, but I was sure something was not right and thankfully that got it fixed before it was too late. Saw an old man fall down. Maybe hit his head, maybe didn't. He denied he hit his head. It drew a lot of attention and told everyone to leave him alone. Basically, he was being stubborn that he was fine. After a minute or two, he went unconscious. I told my friend to call 911, sat down next to him, and held his hand until he woke up. Right, When he woke up I started asking him about his life. Tried to get basic information. Where does he live? How old he is? What other health problems he might have? I did it all in a way that just made it seem like we were chatting. The paramedics arrived. I relayed all relevant information to the paramedics. I went on my way. I felt bad for basically building a bridge of trust and then dipping. He was a little distraught about me leaving. I wasn't in a situation where I could follow him to the hospital at the time or check in. I wanted to give the paramedic the relevant information to assess the situation and make the best choices for the guy. I do well in high stress fast paced situations like this because I overthink everything. I do poorly in high stress slow paced situations that can take weeks because I overthink everything and basically fail to make choices. How about when paranoia and preparation still doesn't save you from insanity that should not have happened in the first place? I work on small film sets, and one time we had several reproduction rifles we needed to get into a car for a shoot. The location is out in the bobbin is on private land, so I knew using the prop rifles out there would be no problem. What I was having extreme anxiety about was the fact that I had to move the rifles from the house to the car in my urban neighborhood. Like I literally rehearsed that moment in my head 6 times. Just have to wrap the guns in the towel, walk them out to the vehicle, stick them in the trunk. What is there to worry about? So I get those guns wrapped in the towel, exit the basement door, walk through my driveway, cross in the grass of my front lawn, and a guy makes a beeline for me from across the street. Not wanting to be holding guns while I talk to someone, I put them down on the lawn in front of me. But I notice that one of the handles is now sticking out of the towel and pretty noticeable. My foot isn't doing a great job of getting the handle covered. The guy asks me if I have any lighter fluid. My brain is firing with anxiety now, and I can't even think straight. I see my partner exit the house with an armload and drop it in the trunk. I yell out to him and ask if he knows if we have any lighter fluid. Because my brain is not processing what is happening anymore. My partner not knowing what is going on heads in the house to look for lighter fluid. Me and this strange man awkwardly stand in my front lawn, making horrible small talk. Like the weather, how's it going, etc. The guns still sit at my feet and are no longer well disguised. It felt like 10 minutes passed like that, terribly long. Just when I start to think things will hopefully resolve soon, or this guy will get bored and leave, I see a cop car drive by, then casually park down the block. Then the cop gets out and walks up to us. Me still standing on the lawn with reproduction realistic looking non-marked guns at my feet, sticking out of their towel disguise, and this stranger standing in front of me. Cop walks up, stands next to the guy, spends a few seconds taking this whole scene in, and then turns to the guy and says, "So I hear you've been asking all over the neighborhood for lighter fluid. Let's take a little walk and talk about it." They both turn and walk down the block. I stand there stunned for a moment, then grab the sloppy pile of guns and towel, run to the car, throw them in the back, and close the hatch. Partner comes out and says he can't find lighter fluid, and then also makes the connection finally to ask why the guy needs it anyways. Turned out the poor guy was having a mental breakdown and was going to burn his car with the fluid. And that is a story of time I just needed 10 seconds to get a pile of guns in my car. So I have health anxiety and maybe OCD, not diagnosed yet, and I had for weeks an obsession with anaphylaxis. I was scared that I will have it, and I was scared that people around me would have anaphylaxis just like that. Well, one day a friend of mine came to visit and complained about a headache. He asked if I have a pill and well, I had. My house is like a little pharmacy. I had a pill which contained Tylenol and other 2 stuff, but of course he did not know the ingredients because he never took that pill before. I was ready to hand him the pill, and it occurred to me randomly just like that to ask him if he's allergic to something. My other friends who were with us were like, "Ugh, you're starting again with that anaphylaxis thing and blah blah." But turns out my friend was anaphylactic to Tylenol, which he knew about, and it was his only allergy, but he just didn't ask what the pill contains. I scolded him then, and since then he tells me he always makes sure before taking any pill it doesn't contain Tylenol. He was really irresponsible given the fact that he doesn't carry any allergy medication just in case, and we were far away from a hospital. Also, I know a lot of stuff because of my health anxiety, which are really helpful, like using an EpiPen, doing CPR, Heimlich maneuver. More than happy to save someone's life thanks to overthinking. This is going to sound like a I have a sex story, but what the hell, why not share it? Whenever I go on vacation, I'm a classic overthinker and overprepare way too much. I'll sit down with my suitcase for a couple hours and run through different scenarios to the point where I find myself packing my TV remote just in case the rental I'm staying at has the same TV that I have, and the remote stops working. Don't know why I do this, but I do. One thing I've always done is packed a single condom, because in my head I'd think of a scenario of me being a single guy on vacation that happens to have a fling with some other vacationer, and then we go our separate ways. I did this for years and never even made a single friend while on vacation. But one summer when my friends and I went on our annual camping trip, I befriended this girl who was my age at the campground. I was the only single one in my friend group, so it wasn't out of the ordinary for the couples to go do their own things while I hung around the cabin and just read a book for a couple hours. I don't even remember how we initially started chatting, but over the course of the week I befriended and chatted daily with this girl who was staying in a camper at the same campground. With both of us being single 20-something horny degenerates, we started flirting and talking dirty to each other. The last night we were there, my friends all wanted to leave early rather than wait till morning, but I said I'd stay behind since I drove separately anyway. I didn't tell them, but I just wanted one more night to spend with this girl. I invited her over to the cabin, and it didn't take long for us to start making out. At one point she told me she wished we could have, and lo and behold I pulled out my condom that I had packed away exactly for a fantasy like this. To this day, it's the most unusual, movie-esque, and exciting UAL experience I've had. In 1978 I was a horribly scrawny 14-year-old kid going through puberty. I had Star Wars and Hobbit in my blood. I was a nerd. I was also going on a study trip to France that summer because I kicked ass in French class and my mom paid for it. 70% of the rest of the kids on the trip were older high school girls. Naturally, I wanted to impress them. Being a scrawny kid, I would fantasize situations where my cleverness would win the day. So I imagined many heroic scenarios, but one was where some young French males would surround me, and several of these young women, catcalling and attempting to seduce the innocent lasses. I, being clever, would confuse them by telling these rapscallions, in French, of course, that we were from Norway, and somehow that would allow the girls to get away. I wasn't a detailed planner. Well, we were studying in a coastal town. One day a Navy ship came in, and as I was walking the seafront with these young women, we were suddenly surrounded by about 8 horny French sailors, who were catcalling and attempting to seduce. Quickly, I sprung into action. First, I got the sailors' attention. Then I announced, in French, naturally, that we were here from Norway. Well, the sailors were completely stumped at how to respond to such an announcement. They began to pepper me with questions. I pretended, well, not really pretended, that I didn't speak French very well. And somehow during all that, the girls managed to get away. It faking worked. They thought I was brave. Dad bought me a survival kit, included some basic, but neat, element like a compass, emergency heat blanket, nylon belt links, 4 holding accessories while hiking, a carbon fiber knife with a grinding stone on the back, and a heavy duty pen that has a stabby bit at the aft end in case you need to bust open a car window, or use the pen as a weapon. And some other misc gadgets. I laughed at the prison pen, but I made it part of my daily kit, mostly as a novelty. The rest of the stuff I left in my car in the package. It was a larger pen and I have somewhat larger hands, so it was more ergonomic, and no one was going to mistake borrowing that thing and forget to give it back. I'm a teacher, what was I going to do? Stab someone? So anyway I stabbed someone. Guy tried to put his hand through the driver's side window as I was parked at a traffic light at night to try and pull off a carjacking. got him in the back of the hand as he was fumbling to unlock the door. Only reason I reacted fast enough was because the door was locked and the window wasn't all the way down. He recoiled. I saw some kind of blade in his left hand and I gunned the turn to get away. He ran off. I got away. I reported the incident. No idea if they got the guy. In retrospect, I'm pissed I didn't have the wherewithal to shout something witty like the pen is mightier, beach, but I was scared, and in robot do it or die mode. I was also lucky that the guy had a knife and not a pistol in this instance. Asking the auto shop about their recommended procedure to get bloodstains out of my car was awkward. Edit, pick of the pen. I found a missing person, and I was not ready, so my father's house is in a small village and I went over there to visit during my lectures week. The night before around 3 AM the dog was barking all night for no reasons, which was weird, because he only barks when a car passes or someone is on our property, but no one was around. My ex was beginning his year in forest studies, or whatever you call it in English, and he had to find branches and pine cones for his project. There is a forest right behind the house, and it was spring. I was super down to go. We go get the dog and my dad stops us. Tells us that they found the car of a missing person in the street, and that the police has been looking for her since last night. He says, you probably won't find her in the woods, because the cops have been looking around with search dogs all night, and haven't found her, but just in case, if you find her call me right away. We go, the dog is happy, we get the branches. I mess around laughing telling my ex, imagine in the papers tomorrow 2 students looking for pine cones finds missing person. I just found it funny, and I was joking. We walk around, get the leaves, branches. Time to leave. I go get the unleashed dog. I get his collar and see in the leaves a piece of fabric. Oh, no big deal. It's a maple tree farm. Someone must have dropped it and never bothered to come back. I looked right beside it and see a hand, a faking hand coming out from the ground all pale and dirty. I just froze. I turned around and tell my ex a couple feet behind, there's a hand. It's the lady. We found the lady. She's there. There's a hand. And then a faking head pops up from the leaves from the ground. The lady wasn't looking good. She was white, basically blue, and her eyes were wide open. She looked at me straight in the eyes and whispered, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody. I don't know how I did to not sheet myself, but my brain was just not processing this. But hopefully my ex was very calm and told me that the best thing we could do was to go back and call my dad once we get signals. Which we did, and the cops arrived before we could go back to the house, took us in their 4-wheels, and we went straight back to find her in the same spot, still buried under the leaves. Yes, she was hidden under the autumn leaves. She was shaking and didn't look too good. When she saw me, she thanked me for finding good cops that were nice to her, told me that she loved my dog, and she hugged me before leaving. I never got to know what happened to her. Sorry if it's not clear, English isn't my first language, and that's the story of how my dog saved a life. COVID, specifically my parents' indiscipline, selfishness, and immaturity infecting our entire family with COVID. If they came back to our country for home leave, they are great in some ways, toxic or incompetent in others, but this is something I warned them about. I broke things down for them into bite-sized pieces to explain how they will infect us and basically reduce us into prisoners for a month, and how they will not learn their lesson and do stupid shit like getting a haircut from a barber the day after they get a negative test result. I told them they should not come to our country until things were under control and instead enjoy the freedom of their embassy compound. Enjoy the fact they can go to the gym, order whatever, go for morning walks with their friends, but don't come here because you won't be able to sit inside and only go out for essentials. Forget infecting people that aren't our family. They couldn't even show enough care to not risk the health of their siblings and their own children. And for what? Did my dad need urgent work completed? No. Did my mother need urgent health checkups? No. All because they wanted to be religious tourists and travel to visit a faking temple out of state using public transport. Now, after their own parents, siblings, and children are still criticizing them for their lack of empathy, intelligence, and discipline, have they learned their lesson? Nope. And guess who knew this was gonna happen back in February of 2020 after Italy and Spain were ravaged? And guess who only watched Indian conservative propaganda news instead of listening to their relatives actually living here? I have a 6-year-old cousin with her parents that lives in our extended family home with us, and sure, kids aren't really in danger, but who in their right mind willingly takes that bet just so they can live like they're teenagers despite being over 50? Like, what the fuck? My cousin showed more patience and understanding than them. My younger brother has fever for a week and 50% of the idiot couple had breathing difficulties needing special medicine and multiple in-house doctor visits, and still 0% of the stupid couple learned. And I don't know, I've heard of parents calling their kids stupid or thinking they are, but growing up knowing your parents are incompetent and toxic and can theoretically do this vs actually seeing them do this surpass even the most likely scenario in your head and give you a faking bingo in the extreme things my parents can do doesn't feel satisfying. It's just sad. Home invasion. I always plan escape routes, things to use in self-defense, points of break-in, what I'd do ECT. Break-in happened, I heard it. I calmly got up, stashed the cash, and ATM card from my wallet under the carpet under my bed, quickly cut it with my pocket knife. Robbers came upstairs, kicked in my door. I was ready to fight. Unfortunately they had guns, so I complied and got laid on my living room floor. As they tore through my clothes and house looking for stuff to steal, I scooched the book off the end table in the living room, and soon as robber 3 wasn't looking, hurled it full force to the opposite room, and crashed into a bunch of lamps/boxes which spooked the fuck out of them. They panicked and started to run out. I proceeded to jump up, hurl the lamp off the end table at the last one exiting, making him fall, and drop his gun. The other 2 were long gone by the time I jumped on him, and tied his hands with my belt. Police were rather impressed. Still never found my ID and such, so I casually grabbed it after. Fuck home invaders. I have several guns now. Pandemic shenanigans and being made redundant. At the very start of the pandemic I had a sixth sense, and I remember leaving work on a normal day just before lockdown began. Overnight we were all told workplaces would close indefinitely, and thinking I feel like this is the last time I'll ever set foot here again. Weird and completely true. I'd been there for 16 years and was highly respected in my field, fine art restoration. The field itself was thriving at the time, if niche, and I had no concrete reason to begin to doubt things. As soon as I was furloughed, thank God, and despite promises from my boss, who was like a father to me after all this time, I had a sneaky suspicion that not only was I going to lose my much loved job, but that my wider career was going to be impossible given the economic climate, and that I would be out of work for years to come. It was very difficult accepting that this could be true, given the long years I'd had specializing in my field. I just knew that in all probability, given a pandemic combined with Brexit and change of regulations, that on balance that there would be no call for a specialist such as me for a long time. My reputation would mean nothing in the face of such a crisis. Oh god, how I was right. I thought, for now I've got furlough pay, then I'll have redundancy, and whatever happens I won't be earning for a while, so let's take this opportunity to retrain. I'd better get ahead of the curve, just in case, because as soon as the redundancies start and the economy begins to tank, everyone will want to retrain, and we won't even get into education if I wait to see what will happen. So I thought long and hard about what I'd like to do, and quietly signed up for a college diploma in horticulture, with a view to eventually working in historic gardens, starting that September. Talk about foresight. As less than a month before my course was due to begin I was indeed made redundant, and I was able to take up my place like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. It's been a difficult year, and an extremely rewarding transition. Early on I tried talking to my closest previous colleague about my thoughts on what we were facing, and he just didn't accept it. I tried urging him to take this time to think about his future and begin to make plans. Unfortunately to this day he still believes that somehow things will just work out if he waits long enough. He still has no work, has not done anything for over a year, and now the redundancy payment has run out. He is a hard lesson to me. Comparing the two of our responses to this crisis has really opened my eyes, and not a little devastating to see. I love him and hope that somehow the market will recover for him soon, but my spidery sense is not optimistic. Ultimately gotta take the time to look hard at your own life, think things through, and take responsibility for yourself, and yes, make backup plans, because the world owes us no favors and shit happens. Friend, if you ever need to reject a guy you don't think would take no for an answer, tell him you're underage. That works for us, because most people guess we're 12 to 14 without any coupon. Some tips I found online: if you find yourself in a situation where you are being pursued in public, draw attention to yourself so that the pursuer notices people are watching and would become hesitant to do anything. I kept this stuff burnt in my mind because I'm always overthinking situations where I'd be out in public and suddenly get stalked. PTSD from when it happened to me twice growing up, except both times I was walking home from school and there weren't many people outside in these neighborhoods. Well, when I was visiting downtown Chicago for a music festival, my friend and I ordered food late at night because we couldn't sleep and walked a few streets down from our hotel to get it. Some guy pissing in the street noticed us walking out of the shop and started shouting, "Hey, wait up," while he hurriedly tried to get his pants up and chase after us. It was clear that he was interested in my friend, and she was terrified. She started to run, but I couldn't because I was holding our food, so I took in my surroundings searching for help and noticed there were quite a lot of people around at 1 AM. I immediately heard that advice in my head and shouted as loudly as I could, "We're underage," back at him, to which he abruptly stopped and people around turned to stare. They glossed over us and stared at him, so he took off. I spent 2 or 3 days scrubbing the room. That included a bathroom, which I spent a lot of time cleaning as well, that I was renting. I was only living there 4 months, so there wasn't much chance for me to cause any wear and tear. I was in a really bad place mentally and was taking it really seriously. Since I was paranoid that I wouldn't get my deposit back, I tend to get paranoid when anxious. The room was honestly clean. I never damaged anything. Then I didn't get part of my deposit back because I didn't clean the bathroom. Supposedly, the person I was subletting from sent me pics to prove it. Frankly, it was just pictures of calcium buildup in the sink, which is a particularly bad problem for water in that city. I also showed friends the pic, and they all asked what was wrong with the bathroom, because they couldn't see anything. It's also illegal to charge from the deposit for either cleaning or normal wear and tear, but it's common courtesy to clean it if you're renting from someone. Tell me how it would cost you €150 to scrub off some calcium. The deposit isn't for you to draw from. If I mildly inconvenience you because you're a princess that needs to be able to see her reflection on every surface. I was so angry that I just removed myself from the situation and didn't bother fighting for that money. Fact that I was really busy and under stress. I took more time than usual just to clean due to my paranoia, and then had my paranoia proven right. I feel like these sorts of small things happen to me all the time. I get paranoid, and then the thing happens I was paranoid about. And I'm supposed to just be calm and confident? I carry a complete change of clothes, including socks and underwear, in my car. Years ago I was working as a nanny. The mom was out of state for work and scheduled in a Skype call between dinner and bedtime. So after we clean up dinner we go into the home office and I started the call. The 3-year-old sat on my lap and the 9-year-old on the arm of the desk chair. A few minutes into the call the toddler was so excited to see her mommy that she peed herself and me. I wish I could have seen my face as my pants and underpants became soaked. I reckon it was hilarious. At least my presence stopped the flow before it hit the desk chair. I stayed calm and collected while the mom, who I had not yet met in person, was very embarrassed and apologetic. The 9-year-old was happy that she got some alone time with mom while I cleaned up her sister and myself. Also related, the same toddler went through a phase some months later where she had more potty accidents, so I started packing extra pairs of her panties every time we went out to the park. I used reusable grocery bags to bring that day's toys as well as snacks/drinks, etc. Most days she didn't need them, and I replaced them in her dresser. One night as I was buying my groceries on my way home from work, the bagger said in a very concerned voice, "Do you know that there is a pair of little girl's panties in your bag?" I think he and the cashier were concerned I was a pedophile. I laughed and told them about my adventures being a nanny, and we had a good laugh about it. Mine pertains to side effects of coronavirus vaccines. Before I got vaccinated, I did a very thorough research of potential side effects, especially those not officially mentioned on the list that you see when you sign up to get vaccinated. The list only mentions minor side effects like the usual headache, joint and muscle pain, fever, and of course, the injection site pain/swelling at a covered arm. What they don't mention are stuff like swollen lymph nodes, screwed up menstrual cycles, numbness/tingling sensations, nosebleeds, diarrhea, vertigo, tinnitus, heart palpitations, and other horrific things that people over at https://www.reddit.com/mention. The first thing I did was make sure I was well hydrated days before the appointment. I'm a heavy drinker of water and juice, so no problem with that. Next, I read that moving and exercising the arm you're gonna get injected at can reduce the stinging pain a lot, as it would allow the vaccine to spread more easily and be absorbed. I only ate mandarin fruits the night before the vaccination, so that I can poop it out before the appointment, so when the shot takes effect, I won't have anything to really vomit or poop out. As for the heart palpitations, I practiced deep breathing in order to force my heart to beat slower. I wasn't alone on the vaccination day. It's actually my family who signed me up. They have all of my documents, and they were underestimating the side effects. I kept warning them to be careful and not treat this like any kind of previous vaccines we've had, because there are many negative side effect reports that weren't listed. I urged them to buy Tylenol, because who knows how severe the vaccine will affect us. Day of the vaccine, we all got our shots. Just as I expected, within 30 minutes, my injection site down to my elbow started to get a numb/tingling feeling, like when you sleep on your arm in a bad way. I immediately forced my arm to move around and massaged it. There was also the stinging pain, of course, but I forced it anyway until the feeling subsided. I also had the headache, which lasted for hours, but thankfully, probably due to me drinking so much water and juice, the pain was just comparable to working in front of the computer for a whole day, something I'm very used to. I also had chills and fever, but I was prepared, and it didn't really bother me that much, because I felt worse before. Up to this day, I still haven't opened up my bottle of Tylenol, because the pain never got to the point that made me desperate for a pain reliever. I was only sick for 2 days. On the other hand, my family members who underestimated the side effects ended up taking Tylenol because they couldn't bear the pain. Imagine if I didn't tell them to buy Tylenol, they probably would have sent me out to buy it for them. It's always better to over-prepare for something than be caught helpless later on. My dog one night was having some tummy issues/his D let a yelp out. So I put him in my lap and gave him a bit of a once over and thought his belly feels really full. So, constipation or internal bleeding? Self, no, you are overreacting, but like, no other symptoms. So, a few days later, he has an accident in the apt, which was weird, and there was blood in his urine. So I run him immediately to the vets. Everyone with experience is like, it's probably not urgent, he must have a UT. Vet is also not super concerned, but says if you want, I can do an ultrasound. I said yes, because I couldn't get the thought of him bleeding internally, or if my head and it was kidney stones or something. I wanted to know sooner rather than later. So it turns out he had a tumor that had burst, and he was bleeding internally, and if I'd left him overnight, well, I would have woken up to a horrific surprise. He had a type of cancer with symptoms that include sudden unexplainable death, because it's a blood vessel cancer, and so it's not the cancer killing them in the normal way. What happens is the tumor bursts and they bleed to death. Because I'm paranoid though, he had surgery the next day, and then he had chemo for a couple months. It wasn't to save his life LNG term though, it was to give him last summer. He got sick in the February, and he died at the end of August, and he got spoiled faking rotten for those 6 months. Dog taxes attached. It is a picture from the fry up breakfast he got one morning as part of his bucket list. I wouldn't say I was completely prepared for it, but the time my best friend died suddenly, I knew she wasn't feeling well. She had gone to the hospital, but they weren't very helpful. So a couple days later I was going to feed her livestock for her when I got off of work because it was getting too difficult for her. She called me and left a voicemail asking if I could tend to the indoor pets too, and she was going back to the hospital. I called her back and left a voicemail to not worry, I'll get everyone taken care of. So then I get a Facebook message from someone claiming to be her neighbor asking if I was the one coming to tend to the animals. When I confirmed, she said it was imperative that I stop at her place first. Y'all, I lost my shit. The rest of my shift I was pacing back and forth babbling incoherently that she died, and there was no other explanation for why it's imperative to check in with the neighbor. So my boyfriend drives me out there because I'm just in a state full on panic attack. Get to the neighbor's place and they hop in the car and ask how close am I to my friend. I respond with very, and at this point things are spinning and I'm nauseous. My heart has dropped as I feel this is confirmation of my fear. That's when the bomb drops. The neighbor tells me that she died before returning to the hospital and explains everything. I'm just in shock and disbelief. We all go over and tend to the animals together. That was a really tough time for me. Unfortunately, my brain took that whole experience to mean that every anxiety-induced or intrusive thought was completely reasonable. It takes me a long time to reason through unreasonable thoughts. It's been a long time now, but still to this day, if I'm expecting someone and they are late, I'm utterly convinced they were in a horrible accident and are dead in a ditch. I get completely irrational and it overrides anything reasonable. Even if the person is texting me updates, my brain just like rejects that info and still thinks that they are obviously dead. Anywho, just added to the list of things anxiety makes me do. OMG, my time has come. I was a bit of a loner, always on my laptop, had some people to talk to every now and then and kept to myself. I have had some issues with the school by getting into some loopholes in the system, but nothing serious like hacking. I barely knew how to code. In high school, a chick with mental issues had sent an email out to all the teachers in the school that she was going to commit suicide. Apparently she didn't send it though, and said she'd been hacked and someone else sent it. The whole year group went berserk over this, wondering who it was. But when I talked to the chick after the incident has happened, she gave me no eye contact and ignored me every time, which was really odd. So I overthink the crap out of it, thinking that she was blaming me for hacking into her computer. Lo and behold, 1 week later the deputy principal calls me into his office and asks me about the incident at hand, and it was so hard not to smile because I was 100% innocent. They asked where I was when it happened, and funnily enough I was getting math help with a teacher. I asked if the chick reported me. He said no, which sounds bullshit af, but the my teacher did. The last convo I had with him was when I coincidentally asked him if you can hack someone's laptop using an IP address after the incident happened. I know there's some amazing hackers out there, but I can't imagine myself, a school kid, hacking from a Windows laptop through the school internet onto a Apple Mac laptop, because I know for a fact that Apple's code is entirely different to Windows, so it'd be some hard stuff to do. My ex-GF was cheating on me. She denied it, but I knew pretty early on. My family booked a holiday, and she was invited as well. We broke up before we went. This was the last thing that triggered my depression. Anyway, so we go on that holiday like almost 1,000 kilometers away from my home, trying to forget the entire situation. As we are settled into the holiday home, my overthinking and anxiety at the time kept saying, but what if I run into any of the two here? This is obviously very unlikely, but me being me, this seemed like a very real thing. Day 2 rolls on in. We go to the supermarket and lo and behold I see a dude that looks oddly familiar. Now it can't be. We are so far away from home. After surviving that panic attack, we get back home and I sit out on the porch. I hear my native language in the house next to us and I'm like, what? There is the dude again. Panic intensifies, but I try to rationalize. It can't be him, right? Until I hear one of the other dudes yell his name and he responds. I really wish I made this up, but from that point on, when people talk to me about low odds or coincidence, I will forever have this in the back of my mind. It's been over 5 years now and everything is fine with me. Depression under control, new girlfriend for almost 3 years and I'm happy. TLDR, Went on holiday over 1,000 kilometers away from my home to escape from my breakup with cheating ex. Dude she cheated on me with and is now dating is legit in the house next to me. When my wife and I was preparing to get married, we need to book a banquet, including the hall and dining. My father was with us, and in the end we choose a place that is quite secluded, which unlike other places in Hong Kong requiring us to pay for 90% of the banquet in advance, in monthly payments. My father questioned this a bit and jokingly said the what if they go bankrupt? And the staff said they are a very well-known club in Hong Kong, normally requires annual membership of 1 million Hong Kong dollars, if not for a wedding banquet, and how would they go bankrupt? And my father said, as big as Lehman Brothers can go bankrupt, so why not? Fast forwards half a year, that we already paid for more than half the payment in advance. They indeed go bankrupt. Well, there's no way we can prepare for this. And if according to common practice of bankruptcy we wouldn't be getting a dime back, as there are more important people ahead of the queue so to speak to get their money back. But since the founder of that club doesn't agree with that discussion and he personally arranged us to get back all the money from a law firm within a few days. That's a roller coaster ride, and while we are very thankful we can get the money back, if not we would be broke and can't hold a wedding banquet, we still need to find another place. It was then half a year prior to our wedding date, and in Hong Kong people normally need to book for that in advance for at least a year. Thankfully, we can find one that still have opening, partially because we are Christian, and so our wedding date is not a fortunate date. In Chinese culture people superstitiously assign dates to be good/bad for a certain activities including wedding. So a fortunate date for wedding normally is fully booked, like at least a year or even two in advance. Everything went smooth for our wedding, but a few years later, when we visited Hang Along and want to revisit that place, they are closed already. I guess it is not a rarity for a restaurant to close business from time to time. I spent some time in southeast China, where earthquakes were semi-frequent. In fact, an entire city was destroyed just a few years prior about 70 kilometers away. I also suffer from frequent adult night terrors. My brain will come up with horrible scenarios in the wee hours of the night, walls closing in, house invasion, etc., which always made me run for the nearest exit. One day, a big earthquake hit the city I was living in. The whole building felt like it was made of jello, all the way up to floor 18 where we lived. Thanks to my paranoid hallucinations, I'm always ready to make a quick exit. That day was no different. I was in game mode. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my flatmates who assumed I was suffering another night terror. But they quickly realized what was going on, and we flew down those 18 floors into the streets. Luckily the building held together, but after it was safe we made our way back to the apartment. We discovered furniture, decorations, and even the TV were overturned. As I entered my bedroom, I discovered my tall, unsecured wardrobe had tipped over onto my bed. I don't think it would have killed me, but it would have hurt. And definitely would have pinned me down should I had needed to escape. For once my paranoid hallucinations came in handy. So I took a bailiff to court for violent assault. Before the court date, I received a call from the arresting officer suggesting I drop the case as I would be unlikely to win. Well, that was odd, because he was the one advising me to take the bailiff to court in the first place. I had CCTV camera evidence of the assault and one eyewitness. So I was thinking of any possible scenario where he would change his view. The bailiff was an officer of the court, so maybe knew some of the police, and the police are just one big boys club after all. I started recording my calls in case this officer called me again. Then, sure enough, I got a call from another police officer, and he was extremely direct. He told me there was no possible way I could win the case as the bailiff was employed by the courts, and also mentioned a several-decade-old offense of mine, and how it would get brought up in court. He said he would make me regret ever taking this to court. So I told him the call was recorded. It was. He yelled at me, "You faking TW," and cut the call off. So in court, almost the first thing to happen was this guy stood up and announced he was the chief police commissioner and that the bailiff was his son-in-law and that he was a calm and reasonable man. So that explained everything. Well, it appears that the bailiff had made up this long story about how I had goaded him into attacking me. So we played the video of the whole event. The judges only needed to see it once. The judges awarded me their judgment and compensation. The guy lost his license. Then we played the audio of the police phone threat. In the following months the commissioner was found to have tried influencing a few different court cases, so I'm guessing his officers rolled on him. He was sacked in disgrace. They didn't even allow him to leave quietly. Edit. This was back in 2012, and I posted each event up, as it happened, on Reddit, under a different username. I'm an exam monitor. Last year. 48 students in an amphitheater. They are massively disorganized. Didn't bother to read the email. I got this. I carry large amounts spare pens, pencils, erasers, pencil sharpeners for the students. They sign the presents sheet and get told to go to a numbered seat. The map is projected on the big screen. They don't know what to do to fill out their name, etc. on the form. Seriously, they are master's students. I got this and project the procedure with diagrams, big black arrows and soundtracks of me reading the instructions. I keep the teaching assistants rotating around the students' seating to check everything in real time. The CD player crapped out mid-soundtrack. I got this. I carry an external CD player and powerful mini loudspeakers to play it via my portable PC. The teaching assistant screwed up and nearly let them walk out of the amphitheater with the test booklets. Holy shit, that's a 20,00 euro fine for me if that happens. By this time I was paranoid and keeping an eye on everything. I ran to cover the screw up, intercepted the unattended stack of booklets just in time. By that time, I had used up so much energy, I didn't even care when many of the students walked off with my spare pencils. But the exam stayed within the boundaries of its rules, because I had over-prepped massively. It was an exhausting win, but still a win. I was drunk as a skunk, but I hope this still counts as overthinking. So, I was at an after party at a friend's place with him, and a couple of women I know, one of which I had been fooling around with at the time. And the space for after parties and TV watching had this short stairs that went down from the side near the TV, and the area in front of the TV was the only real space for dancing. So the girl I had a keen interest in very much liked to dance, in particular in front of me. But I got distracted thinking about and visualizing what I needed to do if she danced backwards and onto those steps. Because, you see, I also wanted to believe she was aware enough to know where the step was, and nobody wants to be treated as a kid. At least that was what I thought at the time. So short story long, one of her feet suddenly found no more floor and she started to tip backwards. And since I was mentally prepared, my body sprang across the 2-3 meters to her and caught her at a 30-degree angle with my arm resting on my knee and my hand holding her neck and shoulders in a very Cinderella/romantic pose. All this before I had the time to think. Now, on the reasons why I think about safety security, that's a whole another story. But Minecraft and lava is involved. So I'm a mountain biker, and in doing so, I scrape up my body pretty bad. A lot. As a result, I have a makeshift first aid kit in my camelback, a sort of backpack that holds water connected to a tube. You use it to drink without stopping. I use it whenever I fall, or generally just need to patch myself up when I can't get off the trails quickly. Anyway, one time I'm riding the loop around my local greenway. It's around 4 miles, and I'm casually biking. I still have my camelback though, since it's really hilly and a pain to try to start on again. I'm mostly through it, and I'm at a part where the trail crosses over a large river, then half a mile later, back down it. At one point, there's a wide deer trail that you can use to get to the riverbed. At this point, I'm tired and I take a break to check the time. I walk down to the river as I normally do. It's calm and I really like sitting by it. But this time, when I walk down, I hear someone huffing and making that noise when you suck air between your teeth. Basically, it sounded like they were in pain. I followed the noise, calling out to whoever it was. I was saying something along the lines of, "Hello, call out to me. I have a first aid kit. I can help." After a few seconds, they called out, "Over here. I'm by the river. Please, hurry." I run to them to see what was wrong. When I got there was a kid sitting on a rock. We'll call him Jacob. He was probably around 15 or so. He was leaning over his leg and holding it tightly. As I walk over, he lifts his hands to show me what it is. He had 2 small puncture wounds, side by side, with the skin around them puffy and red. A snake bite. Where I live we have cottonmouths, and I've seen quite a few personally. I didn't know what snake did this, but I was terrified. I didn't know how to help, but I had to try something. Oh okay. I have some stuff. I don't know if it will help, but you need to work with me on this, okay? Jacob nodded his head hastily. As I pulled out a spare water bottle, I walked him through what I'm going to do. Okay, so first things first. What did the snake look like? It was orange-ish, and it kinda had these darker stripes on its back. I'm not the best with snakes, but it sounded like a rat snake. I told him that they aren't poisonous, but I'm going to call 911 and try to get some paramedics over. We weren't far from a hospital. We were literally in the woods behind it, so after the phone call, it should only be a few minutes until they get here. I talked Jacob through what I'm about to do. I give him the water bottle and a single Benadryl. Once he swallowed that, I took the bottle and started washing off his wound. He started crying, saying that it hurt like hell. I tried to comfort him, saying that the paramedics will be here soon. I took a roll of gauze and started wrapping it tightly around the wound. Once it was all dressed, I told him what to do. Okay, so I think it's only a rat snake, like I told you, but I can't be certain. If it was venomous, there is venom in your bloodstream right now. If so, you can't let it get to your heart. So, what you need to do is to sit down and try to calm down. Take some deep breaths. The Benadryl will help. I'm going to help you up onto the main trail, and we'll find a bench. I'll wait with you until the help arrives. Once he was settled, I got him talking about himself, about anything. I was trying to get his mind off the snake bite. I learned that he had been coming down to the river for the past month or so. He apparently had been studying the life cycle of a species of frogs for a science project. He was a sophomore in high school. He had a golden doodle named Danny, and he had a younger sister. Once he was done talking, he had calmed down a lot. He said that he was feeling a lot better, and how he owes a lot to me. I just told him that I would feel like shit if I didn't help. We sat in silence and just watched people pass by for the next few minutes until the paramedics arrived. They checked out the wound and agreed that it was a rat snake from Jacob's description. They took off the gauze and wrapped it with a new layer. They thanked me for helping and walked him back to the entrance, presumably to get the bite checked on by a doctor. I'm sorry that this was so long. I just wanted to put this story somewhere and this seemed like the best spot to do so. This may not fit into overthinking, but I definitely overprepared. I don't know how Jacob is. All I saw of him was that day. Again, sorry if this was a bit dramatic. I just felt like a hero for weeks after it. I hope you enjoyed my story. Edit. Thank you so much for whoever just got me to 1k karma. You're a legend. I'm always carrying a bunch of stuff in my backpack. I could be pills, acetaminophen, ibuprofen, Benadryl, a Ziploc bag of tissue, a tote bag, an oversized thick plastic bag, band-aid, masking tape, small measuring tape, a single shoelace I found on the ground, not kidding, always told myself it could be useful, and a cleaning rag. I've started doing this in secondary school, then college, then adult life. Same backpack too, I've been carrying it for 13 years. I take care of my stuff. Why do one need a cleaning rag in his bag? Because you never know. One time we were doing a team project in college. My friend spilled her coffee on the table. I was a matter of time before our documents were soaked. Lo and behold, me the guy always ready for everything pull out my rag and save the day. A few weeks prior to that event, still in college, I arrive early to my class, like always. Suddenly one guy who's usually always late came early, dropped his bag and rushed out, since he needed to get his project from the computer at the other end of the building, cause he didn't do it the night before. I guess he liked being late. However, we had a policy, keep the room clean, no dirt of melted snow on the floor. We are in Quebec and there was snow outside, so our boots got all dirty and leave water on the floor. And there are folks who don't wear boots and switch to shoes inside. Instead they just wear shoes and make the place dirty. So the guy was rushing and saw the mess he left on the ground in panic. He had to get his project on his drive, plus wipe the floor, before the teacher arrived in the class/studio. You know what happens next. I pull out my trusty little rag and wipe the floor clean, saving the guy's fate. Why do one need a small measuring tape in his bag? Because you never know. We had an evaluation in one of my classes in college. We had to reproduce a shoebox, a real one we had in the class, and animate it in C4D, in a matter of time. Most people just eyeball it, make a rectangular box and calls it a day. I cannot simply do some random shape. It said reproduction. I needed the measurements. We were post-production students, not the kind of folks who carry the means to measure objects in their daily lives, except for me of course, cause I'm the weird one always ready for everything. So I pulled out my measuring tape at the start of the class before people arrived, except for the teacher, he was always early, and proceed to get the right measurement from the physical box, and thus got a perfect shape for my CG show box. 96% on that evaluation, way higher than most people. Winter coat. It's necessary if you live in Canada. A few years ago I got myself one with loads of pockets. I love pockets. You can store all sorts of things in there. A Ziploc bag full of tissues, a reflecting high visibility bracer, spare coins if you need to take the bus, and got no cards, or no spare change in your pocket. And what about a spare set of gloves? I already have a pair of gloves. Why two? Because you never know. Still in college, we are doing a project where we first needed to film some good looking shots during the night, cause we needed night lights on buildings and such. So it's a winter night, a beautiful one too, with thick slow falling snow and frigid air. However, one guy in our team didn't prep as well as he thought. He forgot to bring gloves and we kinda needed fingers to operate a DSLR. You know the drill. They knew the drill. Surprise secondary pair of gloves directly from yours truly. Saved him from his demise of frozen fingers. Congratulations, you have been invited to a party in a shack resort. Friends and friendly coworker will be making a potluck. I hate food waste. I grew up in the countryside and was frugal before I even knew it was a thing. If a group of adults in their late 20s will make a potluck, surely there will be leftovers. I always keep some plastic container, basic one you can buy at the dollar store, that I actually got from margarine containers that I cleaned, because it's the exact same model. It sits in my cupboard, waiting to get used. I brought 5 of them at the party. Why you ask? Because you never know. The potluck was sorta fun, but inebriated cooking and inebriated planning before the cooking leads to questionable results. Leftovers happened, more than they thought. I hate wasting food, and the friend who organized the party, what a great guy, also stated to avoid wasting food as much as possible, but alas, it happened. No one had containers for leftovers, except for good old me, who gave my cheap container to save the day, and the food. I also brought spare reusable shopping bags at the party. I was part of the cleaning team. Lots of stuff was left by the others. Lots of stuff was brought at my place thanks to those bags. I mean, there was a whole barely opened can of maple syrup. That stuff is expensive. I just wrapped it up in saran wrap and put a rubber band that I had in my bag, you guessed it, and it was sealed. I put a beer bottle box at the bottom of my bag so it could sit upright. COVID happened. We are all sent home. Fear settles in, and there's no food at the grocery because people bought everything for the confinement. Guess who had loads of canned food way before March 2020? The neighbor? The old cat lady down the street? Elvis Presley on his island? No, me. Why having loads of canned food in your cupboard? BEAKRCYOU Northeast Velno. I'm always ready for every eventuality. Friends learned it with time. I like making fun of myself for this. I think it's ridiculous sometimes, but if I'm not prepped I always have bad feelings. Overthinking made me win more than it made me lose, that's a fact. In the beginning of this year I got promoted to a position where I'm responsible for the safety at my place of work, a regular office. I started looking through the rules and regulations and found that some of the supervisors hadn't gone through a first aid/CPR course in the last 2 years, including myself. At 26 I'm the oldest of all the supervisors, so you can imagine that neither of us has had much experience with emergencies. My boss booked a course for us at the end of March that took us through first aid, CPR and general emergency psychology. I've always been a bit of a hypochondriac and regularly scour the Ask Reddit threads directed at medical and emergency personnel, and I asked a bunch of questions about hypothetical scenarios and requested anecdotes during the course. 2 weeks ago a colleague with no previous history had an epileptic seizure while on the phone with a customer. As soon as I received the call I went there and was able to manage the situation. Sending well-meaning fussing coworkers to the next room, put a jacket under my colleague's head, and just sat next to him while the seizure passed, gave a report to ambulance personnel, and then had a talk with every single coworker about the situation, watch their feelings about what happened. Some needed to cry, some vent, others wanted to know what they could do in the future, etc. We had a very good exchange about this, and we all kind of felt like a big family at the end of it. Thanks to all the people who've shared your stories of emergencies on social media like Reddit. Your first-hand accounts have helped me imagine countless scenarios and helped me act when something really happened. Oh, geez. Well, you know how 2020 was the shit year for everybody? Yeah. I'm no exception. So, late 2019, things are going great. I have a beautiful girlfriend, she has a precious son, and we are trying for another. Inspired by my recent promotions and newfound financial security, we were looking at homes, shopping for schools, just living the dream. With one caveat. I'm an overthinker, and I have had problems with jealousy in the past. So every time it came up that I was feeling jealous with my new love interacting with and generally doing normal parenting stuff with her boy's biological father, I very firmly told myself how absolutely ludicrous. It could never happen. Don't let this irrational thinking go on. So I would bring it up during the times where it was really bothering me, and I made sure to be clear in communicating that I didn't have a problem with him and her interacting. It was just a twinge of pain from past relationships that I had moved on from. She was very reassuring and understanding. Around this time, we became pregnant, and I was elated. She was not as enthusiastic, given that we hadn't found a place to live yet, and I had recently purchased a Camaro thinking we'd have plenty of time to prepare. We confidently went to our first appointment and discovered we were, indeed, pregnant. Christmas comes around, and my father received the gift of learning that he'd be a grandfather again in about 8 months from then. It was around this time, the days after Christmas, I had to cope with a little twinge of jealousy. I told my girlfriend I was just a hit sad that she only got Christmas evening with me, but Christmas morning and New Year's with him. I expressed that I really wanted to spend New Year's with her, and she pretty firmly shot me down, almost like she knew I was going to propose and didn't want me to. The day before New Year's she told me some horrible news. She was bleeding a bit and didn't feel right in her tummy. I asked her if I could take her to the doctor, and she said no, just to watch her son while she went on her own. I figured that was acceptable. From 9 AM until 7 PM I didn't hear anything from her, and it should have just been a short appointment, blood work at most. She finally called me and said she was on her way over to pick up her son, that she was miscarrying, and that the doctor told her it was caused by our aggressive intercourse. So right off the bat, overthinking me is wondering about everything she just said. She's not crying, she's simply driving over to pick up her son. She arrives, and pretty much exactly that happens. Inside I was dying, on the verge of tears from the moment I saw her, until the moment she spoke the first words that gave me doubt. I told you we should have been more careful. That is not a sentence she had ever spoken to me concerning the health of our unborn baby. In fact, she was quite persistent and passionate. We hugged, kissed goodbye, and she left me alone with my thoughts to churn. The next day, without any provocation, on New Year's, she says she needs some space and time to process. By this point I have already overthought every scenario and resigned to my room ready to deal with the anxiety and unknowingness that comes from my need space. I totally accepted her desire for space, but I didn't understand it. I came to know her as someone who needed a strong and confident partner to confide in, because she herself wants to be strong but isn't confident. We were such a strong team because she was fiery and passionate on the outside, but timid on the inside, and I was timid on the outside and fiery on the inside. One of the things that continuously churned around in my mind for the first weeks of January 2020 was her saying the doctor blamed her aggressive intercourse for her unborn baby dying, and that just stuck out to me as biologically improbable. Sure enough, after a quick search, it's exceedingly rare for any complications to arise from intercourse of any intensity, aside from breaching the cervix and tearing it, which would be exceedingly painful for both parties. There's really not much damage you can do. So, as every tragedy goes, she inevitably decided to leave me with I thought it was clear we were broken up. I'm going to stay single for a long time. My son is my first priority. You're a great guy. And I let it go. I've got too much experience in this life to flip out and lose emotional control anymore. But I'll let it go in the healthiest way I knew how. I gathered the last of her belongings, sent her a text, your stuff is here. In 1 month it will be abandoned, and you may see me trying to sell it. I have time this weekend for you to pick it up if you wish. I didn't receive a response 30 days later, in February, with thoughts still churning about whether she got an abortion. Was I that horrible? Faked the miscarriage? Did she cheat? Never got pregnant? Is she psycho? I pushed that all to the back of my mind and began posting the items of clothing, shoes, makeup, and Apple Watch she had left behind. The watch needed a charger, but a trip to Walmart solved that. Immediately upon charging the device, it connected to my Wi-Fi and a string of texts between her and her ex popped up, so I read them and essentially learned that they were back together. No surprise there. I've been lied to so many times. I'm surprised when I find out I've been told the truth. What I saw when I scrolled down was a bit more surprising. An email from her doctor saying she's soon entering her second trimester with no complications. I even got to see the ultrasounds. I texted her and said, do you have a due date? I'd like my lawyer to have a time frame for when we can start the process of establishing paternity. My lawyer advised me not to attempt communication again after that. She never responded. She skipped state, sold her car, lives in a big house with her now husband and 2 sons. A much less mature and stable version of me would have compiled this whole sheet scenario into a few new criminal charges. Be aware, overthinkers, that your emotions will be your downfall if you let them. I have a chance to know who my son is and be a part of his life because of my emotional control. Had I went through this a few years prior, I likely would have snapped and lost any chance to know my son. Stability. Learn it. Know it. Practice every day. It all began in the winter of 2018. My mother is aging, and I'm always looking for ways to make life a little more comfortable and convenient for her. I decided to buy her a bidet toilet seat. She took a bad fall and broke her arm a few years prior, and it was becoming more difficult to wipe after going to the bathroom. I head to Costco, large American warehouse store, buy the bidet and head home to install it as a surprise. Unfortunately, the bidet needs to be plugged in. It has a night light, heated seat, water heater, drying fan, and a remote control, and there was no electrical outlet within reach of the power cord. Instead of returning the fancy $300+ bidet and replacing it with a regular one that doesn't require power, I decided to add an electrical outlet at a convenient location on the wall behind her toilet. Well, when you give a mouse a cookie, the only way to install an outlet at that location is to go through the wall to my bathroom on the other side of the wall. This required me to remove my bathroom mirror, since I had to run wiring through the wall to my light switch. When I removed the mirror, the little metal strip that holds the mirror in place on the top of the backsplash got damaged. The backsplash was the same material as the countertop, ugly yellowish color, which was apparently all the rage back in the 1970s when the house was built. So then I decided I may as well replace the backsplash and countertop. This turned into an entire bathroom remodel. I buy all the stuff I need, replacing the sink, faucet, water pipes, countertop, backsplash, and drywall. While I'm at Home Depot, I decide to buy additional electrical components to add an outlet to my bathroom as well. Since I already had the wall open, why not? I add the electrical components, install the new sink and countertops, and repair the drywall. Thank goodness you can find out how to do all these projects on YouTube. This entire project took me about a year to complete. So now it's February of 2020 and my bathroom is looking pretty good, but I still needed to replace my toilet because it looked old and everything else was new. I head to Costco and buy a replacement toilet. Next to the toilets are the very same bidets and now they're on sale. I decide to treat myself and buy another one for my bathroom. After all, I had a power source. At the time, I had a full-time job and a life, so I didn't get around to installing the bidet in my bathroom until the second week of March. No less than a week later, it's announced that we are going into COVID lockdown, and there's a run on toilet paper. I was due to buy my normal allotment, and I couldn't find any anywhere. What were these savages thinking? Why toilet paper of all things? Since I couldn't find toilet paper, I decided to buy a tremendous amount of alcohol. I figured that, if the world as I knew it was coming to an end, I could barter alcohol for various goods, like toilet paper. Turns out I drank most of the booze over the last year. I digress. Anyhow, it all worked out for my household. The bidets are awesome. My booty hole has never felt cleaner. I don't even use toilet paper, unless I'm in too much of a hurry, to let the drying fan on the bidet work its magic. I had never used a bidet before, because I'm an American, and, well, backquote Merca. We drive big cars, shoot big guns, and if we choose to smear poop all over ourselves when we wipe, it's our God-given right. I'm a convertor, and I highly recommend getting a bidet. This is my first post, so I hope you enjoyed this pandemic and how it is being handled. I even wrote a novel about it, and have the draft completed for the second novel. It is a trilogy. I call the first Frankenvirus. It is how a pandemic is accidentally started when viral research is done offshore, to prevent the violation of laws that forbid this research in the US. In the first novel, the virus was believed to be stopped by a Russian bioweapons team, however it manages to escape, and the next novel focuses on its evolution in China. I call the second novel Zoonosis, because it shows how the virus undergoes further mutations in animals, and is on the verge of creating a pandemic. The final novel I call Surge Capacity and shows how the pandemic sweeps the world in the insane measures countries use in an attempt to contain its spread. The novel is based upon actual historical events and research that occurred years before our current pandemic. I wrote my novel in the hopes of educating the public on what to expect, and hopefully avoid panic when a real pandemic occurred. Unfortunately, I was unable to find a publisher, because most considered the fact-based novel as too academic. Here is a very early draft of the first novel in case any doubt my claims. https://www.wattpad.com/I used to be a molecular biologist and worked for a drug company on viruses, and later I became an IQ nurse who specialized in infectious diseases, and that is why I had this interest. I also am currently living off-grid in a remote mountain in Appalachia. How is that for preparedness? Went on vacation with my family, and for the first time in my life, it was a connecting flight. My dad had booked it all, and only left us 30 minutes to catch our connecting flight. I told him I had a bad feeling about that, and he should try to move the flights around, but he refused. I never pre-Google my flights as nothing of note would ever come up, but there I was Googling my flight, and turns out, for some reason, the top result was that this flight almost always runs 30 minutes late. I relay the info to my dad, who continues to dismiss me. I think to myself, well, he used to travel a lot for work, he should know, right? Right. I still had a bad feeling, and decided that it was probably best to pack a change of clothes in my carry-on just in case, even though I never do. We get to our first stop, and lo and behold, our plane had taken off 30 minutes late, leaving us exactly 0 minutes to get to our connecting flight. Literally as our wheels touched the tarmac, the other flight was locking its doors. After having to deal with the mess cause my parents couldn't be bothered, I made the decision that we fly to another country to catch the next flight to our final destination. Fast forward, we finally get to our final destination only to find out all of our luggage was lost. Not a single one managed to get on our new connecting flights. Luckily for me, I had packed an extra set of clothes, so I was solid, but everyone was left scrambling to find clothes in a country we've never been before. During our 2-week trip, we didn't have our luggage for a week. Cherry on top, on the way back, I packed bags and thought, the chances of them losing our luggage is slim, right? No. Let's pack anything that I know I want with me. Turns out, I called it. On the way back, despite making our flights on time, they lost our luggage again, and they weren't returned to us for almost 3 weeks. Trust your intuition, and overthinking folks, lol. I know I'm really late to the game and this will probably get buried, and it's long but worth a read. But anyway, when I was a senior in high school, we all only had flip phones, and it still wasn't at a phase that everyone had phones yet. But my brother, 21, and his best friend, 23, always had their phones blowing up with calls. They partied a lot. I had also been dealing with a rare grand seizure disorder since I was a freshman in high school, and my parents had gotten me a cell phone really young for that reason. A little backstory, both of my older brothers and 3 of their best friends would check in with me multiple times a week when I was at school because they were used to me having a grand seizure at least once every 2 weeks, but they had started to happen once every 6 to 7 days, and no doctors had figured out how to stop them yet. So all 5 of those guys checked on me religiously, and the school administration had approved them to sign me out for the day if I felt even mildly tense or faint. So, back to the overthinking. It was super common for people not to answer their cell phones in 2006. Not many people had them, and they didn't ring that loud. One night my brother's best friend was going to meet his new girlfriend at the bar where she worked. Around 10 PM he was supposed to meet at my parents' house with about 10 of us having a blockbuster movie night. He was never late. Ever. Never. Late. Ever. When midnight rolled around, and he hadn't shown up, wasn't answering his cell, the bar phone kept ringing with no answer, I panicked. My entire family and friends were used to me being an anxious overthinker 24/7. I always assumed the worst case scenario. I demanded my brothers and I drive to the bar. I couldn't drive because seizures. They said okay, if he's not answering by 1 AM we'll go. So 1 AM came and went, and we drove the 30 minutes to the bar. 1 mile away from the bar, we see headlights coming up from a ditch, and another car sitting on the road without any damage. We pulled over immediately. I just faking knew. I knew it was him. But my brother said no, he was going to call us when he left the bar. But he'd never made it to the bar. The couple who had been driving the car without any damage were screaming at each other and slurring their words horribly. They kept saying it was an accident to us over and over and begging us not to call the cops. I immediately said to my brothers he's dead. They still insisted I was overthinking, and one of them grabbed a stick out of his car to try to balance himself down into this really deep ditch beside a lake. But I just faking knew. I knew my overthinking was right. I had made my brother carry roadside emergency auto and medical kits. Either the medical kit down into the ditch for my brother. About 30 seconds later I heard my brother screaming and puking. I jumped down and opened up the hyperventilation bag. He pressed out. The bag had smelling salts, and I woke him back up. I saw our friend and immediately started puking everywhere. Our best friend had gotten a flat tire 1 mile from the bar. He had his flashers on and had set out a flare and 2 of those portable flashing emergency cones while he was changing his tire. I had also bought him the emergency auto and medical kits for Christmas, and he said I was crazy paranoid, but here he was using it in all the right ways to protect himself. The couple in the other car were extremely drunk and had swerved and hit him at 60 miles per hour, and their reasons were so delayed that they fully ran him over after the cops said the impact of the hit had thrown him 1,100 feet. They measured blood and flesh stains on the asphalt. The drunk couple knew he was dead, so they rolled his car into the ditch and put his body back in his car to try to make it look like he crashed. They told us this. But most cell phones didn't have video capability back then, so we couldn't record that confession. They bolted as soon as we called 911. However, I also made my brothers carry digital cameras in their cars in case they needed to photograph a car accident for insurance. They were able to get a decent enough zoomed photo of that couple's license plate as they drove away. If I hadn't been overthinking, my brothers and our friends would have chalked up his no-show to the movie night as just him going home with his girlfriend. We never would have had a license plate and verbal confession from that couple to take to court. Unfortunately they only got 4 months in jail and 6 months community service, which still makes my blood boil 15 years later, but at least I have the peace of knowing what truly happened versus having some unknown sketchy story. Edit. Format. Had my time to shine. My husband talking to someone in an intimate way and sending photos. He'd become really distant. He would stay up really late at night to the point I'd go to bed earlier than him. For context, I'm a night owl. He goes to sleep early, rises early. I would lay in bed thinking he's gotta be cheating on me. He's definitely cheating on me. Oh god, don't be that way, don't think like that. Stop. Well, one night I go to bed at 10 PM. He's still on his computer playing a game. The usual. I wake up at 1 AM because I'm hot. Remember that I hadn't turned the account back on from earlier that day. Decided to go turn it on. Noticed he's still not in bed. I think he must have fell asleep downstairs. Not unusual. Then I hear his computer, him typing away, clicking, a notification sound going off. Okay, also not unusual. He might be playing with his friends, and instead of voice chatting, because he gets extremely loud, he's just using FB Messenger, the old days before Discord. He sees me, and just kinda looks like, oh fuck. I say, hey, it's really late. You coming to bed? He just says, oh yeah. I ask him if he's playing with his friends, and if they are still trying to get out of LOL. He just says yay. Vaguely. I just kinda go, huh, okay, and go back upstairs. 2 hours later he comes up, wakes me up, and says, I need to tell you something. I'm thinking maybe he was playing a tournament or something and won, or whatever. I was not expecting him to say, I want this to come from me. I've been talking to this woman. She asked me to come see her next weekend, and when I refused, she said she was going to message you and tell you. So I thought you should know from me. I already blocked her, but I'm sure she remembers my name and can look you up. I'm sorry, I don't know what to do, but I didn't want it to go that far. I just look at him and say, well, where's your computer? You can report her for harassing you, and I'll block her on my account too. I'm like, really not surprised at all. He tells me everything and is shocked at how calm I was. I tell him I'm going home for a while. I don't know if I'm coming back. I need a break from you. I don't know why you'd do this. I feel like it's my fault. But I'm just going to go home. I left for almost 2 months. We worked through a lot. I told him that unless he can figure out why he felt the need to reach out to someone else in an intimate way, and not his wife who is always open and wanting him to talk to her about his feelings, don't talk to me. It took him a few days. He wrote me a very long message explaining things. We ended up going to therapy. We worked a lot of it out. Overthinking like that and telling myself, if it happens, this is what is going to happen, helped me cope when it did happen. I knew exactly what to do, who to call, and where I was gonna go. It might be because my dad cheated on my mom, and she had no type of plan. She kicked my dad out, but was still a mess. She was completely absent from us kids. She even just left us at our grandma's with our dad, and just left for a few days. Didn't tell us why, or where she was. I think just that experience really made me think, if I have to leave, this is where I'll go, who I'll call, and what I need to do first. I've 27 meters. Always had an issue trusting men, especially men who are obviously attracted to my female friends. It's mostly due to a very traumatic upbringing, and also knowing young men well enough not to trust them. One time it actually worked out. Once my friend group came into contact with this older guy in the church congregation a city away. We were all late teens/early 20s, and he was in his 30s and recently divorced. He was super charismatic and fun to be around, and, most importantly, he would supply alcohol to those of us who were underage. Looking back, I don't know why this was shocking, but I didn't trust him at all, and I regularly voiced that to all of my friends. Unfortunately, it was a very boy who called wolf situation, because everyone thought I was just being mean and didn't like another guy coming into the friend group. This went on for a few months until one night he hosted a gathering that I didn't end up going to. He got all of the young girls drunk that night, and he was the only male at the gathering. Thankfully all of my girlfriends left the gathering, but one of our mutual friends stayed. She was a bit older and also not a very mature person, so this isn't shocking. Anyways, as you might have guessed, he got super touchy and inappropriate with the one girl who stayed, and we had to go pick her up before he assaulted her further. It was super sad, and after that he continues to hold a place of status in the congregation after marrying a much older girl not even a year later. The only good part of this story is that by the time this happened I had the sense to not say "I told you so" to all of my friends, although later someone was nice enough to acknowledge that I had said the whole time that I didn't trust him. I have anxiety issues. But having my family prepared to leave the country when the 2011 Tohoku earthquake happened, it was only the paperwork portion. I was in the military, my firstborn was 1, and I had a second along the way. So, I was worried about something big happening, and had all my affairs already in order and plan B and C's. When the earthquake happened, and they were evacuating the installation, my family was first in line because my will, vaccine records, next of kin, literally everything they had in the checklist and more I had already done and squared away in my preparation of an event. My ex was impressed. Little did she know that I even had prepped food and water for like a month way before, and that was just in case we had to bunker down at the house. Plus, I had bug out bags and other gear stored away in case we had to leave the base and move up the mountains, maps, tents, machetes, food, water, cash and more. We were more than ready in case anything happened. Probably gonna do the same here in New York City. Edit. I also knew about COVID-19 in Jan and was as certain as my paranoid self can be the 1st or 2nd of February. Posting things on FB and preparing for the shutdown. Not toilet paper though, that was stupid as fuck. TLDR. We had a condo with issues in the building. My paranoid brain said things could get way worse, so we sold for a massive loss, only to learn that mere months later the whole building and suite flooded. The long version, we owned a condo that had some issues with the mechanical heating system. We all had fan coils in our units that weren't doing well. There's a lot of details, but long story short we decided to nope out of there because we were tired of dealing with the issues. We knew there was a big special assessment coming down the pipes. They told us $30K for units our size. A flood from the year before had made our insurance premium for the building go up and made the deductible for water $300K, and I didn't want to wait around while the board hemmed and hawed about what to do about the fan coils that weren't functioning properly. So we listed at a low price to account for the problems and risk, knowing we'll lose $100K, and I'm panicked the whole time because all I can think is OMG we have to sell now because a fan coil will fail. The building is going to flood. The insurance deductible is so high that the cost is going to be a nightmare. Simultaneously trying to calm myself down because the board wasn't concerned because they were working on a fix. We sold really fast despite a slow market and all the building issues because the unit looked amazing and we made it a quick close. The time between closing and possession was complete torture thinking of all the things that could go wrong. The assessment, which we disclosed, was eventually coming to the seller, could get levied early, and we'd be on the hook. The place could flood before the mesh system got fixed, etc. One of the most stressful months of my life. Of course at the same time to some extent worrying we were making a huge mistake by selling, because we were losing so much money and the suite was amazing. God, I miss that kitchen and natural light. We hand over the keys and move back into our tiny original condo. 2 months later a pipe bursts on the top floor of the building and the whole thing floods on one side, including our former suite. Last we heard, they were looking at special assessments of $100K now to cover the floods plus all the original stuff that had to be done. Needless to say, the whole experience completely reinforced my paranoid everything that can go wrong will thinking. I'm just glad we went with our gut that things could always get worse. Edited to add the TLDR. A few years after moving out of my childhood home, my stepfather hit me up asking for help cause he had a hip surgery. Mind you, I moved out because of this man. However, at the time I needed to get my JED and auto license. so I agreed under the condition that he both provide and pay for a way to acquire them. He agreed and I moved along with my partner at the time. As soon as we got there, I had a funky feeling, so I hit up every single old friend I could think of. I asked every single one of them that, if things go south, could we crash? I got a few yes, and then worked my ass off bull rushing the completion of the Jed and Auto, all while leaving him to think we had nowhere else to go. Shortly after I acquired those, the house started to regain its familiar tension. It started out small little comments and complaints about stuff. Then one day him and my partner got into a fight. He yelled at her and I snapped. Memory is foggy, but it went about like this. Him yells at her, me yells back him, you don't yell at me in my house. Me, I don't give a fuck whose house we are in, you don't yell at her. Also, I'm the only one making money and paying the mortgage, so whose house is this really? Him, get the fuck out now. Me, one step ahead of you chief. Pulls out my phone and calls friend A. Hey yo, it happened like I thought it would, so can you come on over please? His face as I hung up and started packing without a flinch was so damn good. They showed up, we openly trash talked his ass while packing, and then left without a goodbye. If I never pre-planned for his ways, I would be homeless. I love my overthinking, anxiety-ridden brain. This will be buried, and I'm not totally sure it fits, but here goes. I was going to visit my then GF at her school a few hours south of me. She had driven through my town, and I was following her down. The highway we were on was more concrete than asphalt, and my tires were making a funny sound on them. Oh, and we had walkie-talkies to chat while we drove. At some point, for some reason, and I still don't know why, a scene from the movie Changing Lanes popped into my head. Short version, Sam Jackson, in a taxi, spins a tire iron next to Ben Affleck, who panics just as his wheel falls off his car. Anyway, that sheet's on my mind, and I grabbed my walkie-talkie to tell my GF that my car is making a funny sound. She says it's probably the road and I shouldn't worry about it. I'm about to answer, when out of the corner of my eye, I see my front driver side wheel just roll off my car. It takes off across the median and time slows to a crawl. I was driving a back 92 Ford Explorer, and as the front corner of the car dipped down, what was left of the axle dug into the pavement and there was a shower of sparks so big I couldn't see out of my window. I stomped on the brakes, and the pedal went all the way to the floor, as my caliper had left with the wheel, and all I could do was try and yank the steering wheel as hard as I could to try and coast into the shoulder. Oh, and I was screeching into the walkie-talkie while all this happened. Regardless, I don't know why that scene popped in my head. And I don't know if it helped me or not, except that the whole scenario was not nearly as surprising as it should have been. I don't know if this counts, but my last job was terrible, and I had the scenario play out in my head for a year that management would try to screw me. One day the feeling became so intense that I went to our union about the situation. The harassment, false promises, blatantism, female in tech, threats, sabotage, union busting, etc. As I'm telling the union rep my concerns, management sends them an email stating that they, management, wants them, union, to fire me. The rep is just astounded and states, we are the union, we don't fire people. Who are these people? Well, all that overthinking meant I had oodles of evidence. Even though they disabled my work email, the emails were still on my devices and I screenshot them, and the chats as well. Boy oh boy, they weren't happy about that. Then they tried to falsify my dismissal to unemployment. The unemployment rep was a turt, willing to ignore everything I said, and I threw it in her face. I have evidence that they are lying. Do you? The union stepped in with assistance from my doctor and neurologist to show how management had been lying. This is on top of the 6 months it took to get a correct record of employment. They actually sent me 3 incorrect records before unemployment just took my word for the hours and pay for the last year. I've never heard of that happening. But all that overthinking had me ready for their bullshit. Funny bit of irony bonus, they refused to let me work from home as punishment for standing up for myself. 6 months later COVID hit and they aren't allowed to work from the office. Serial killer incident, maybe, that I didn't fathom involved a possible murderer. I learned years later that he was suspected of killing several, using a similar modus operandi. He was a police officer whom I had previously seen and talked to in town. While on duty he asked if I was interested in learning how to shoot a gun because he asked me in front of his partner, in public, in front of the group I was walking with. I said yes and never got any creepy vibes. I was familiar with the gun club shooting range location. I knew where we were going to go. When I told a friend about it, she didn't like anything about it. I was to meet him at a restaurant. Normally I would have driven my separate car to any type of meetup destination. Since he was a law enforcement officer, after I arrived at the restaurant parking lot, I agreed to leave my car parked at that restaurant. Which, in hindsight, kinda temporarily disappeared my car, due to it being towed. After we drove away in his truck, I had somehow misplaced my phone, and as mentioned he was a law enforcement officer, so I trusted him. My car wasn't GPS equipped. We made it to the gun range, and we did as others on the range were doing. I pretended to notice someone I knew, and waved to a vague group. Nothing weird, yet, other than my waving to nobody. On the ride back towards the town, where my car had been parked, he started asking questions that caused me to be very concerned. Questions that caused chills. My blood ran cold when it appeared that his eyes turned black. I kept talking, lying perfectly, giving him answers that he wanted in a way that was believable. Also was trying to convince him that my location was known by whomever I had told about where I was going that afternoon. I didn't have a phone with me, but he didn't know that, so I adapted everything to be vaguely not phone dependent, to make him think an unknown number of people knew his name, etc. In reality nobody knew his identity. All in all, I wanted him to believe that many knew where I was located, when, technically zero knew my current location. No phone meant that I had to convince him to not do anything but drive me to my car. The longest 30 minutes of my life equals that drive back to the spot where my car was parked/towed away. Upon seeing no car, he drove me to my car that was inside the towing facility, and he paid for my car's release. I made it back home alive and told nobody about the incident until a few years later after I learned that he was dead. Graduate Program Project Group. The exact details I'll leave out, since there seem to be few enough programs that makes identifying personal info really easy. Basically I was tasked as a team lead to ensure the group kept itself to task. The task was self-defined after the first semester, so we collectively decided as a team of 7 to go overkill and have a functional prototype to present to the program directors. Now that the context is out of the way, I see we have 5 weeks left until all our efforts are due for presentation, and think to myself, here's what's going to happen. We are going to try and do everything last minute, because we're young 20-somethings. I'm going to emphasize a general schedule for the 3rd week, so we can avoid doing it all last minute. Then I'll assess the man hours expected to complete each task. Clearly this is logical for a project schedule, except I went down the rabbit hole and tacked on man hours for critical problems in each task. So I tallied something on the order of 170 man hours plus 400 for critical errors on all tasks. I had an inherently bad feeling that a bunch of 20-somethings were going to cram the hardest work into the last week after all. This wasn't the real problem, however. The real problem was all the critical hurdles popping up in the final week, throwing an extra 400 man hours on the table. I reasoned this rabbit hole of digging because I'm extremely distrustful of manufacturers that have a spec sheet saying, works with this line of code we put on GitHub. 3 weeks later, week 3, everything went exactly as planned. Everyone ignored my input to divide tasks into a few major subgroups earlier. I had to force the split into cross-functional subgroups in the team, arguably better than my original suggestion. I then post my estimation of man hours to explain that we can get everything done without any miracles. Week 4, more unexpected events show up, total addition of about 100 man hours. People complain about man hours being too complicated, even though they didn't need to understand it themselves for their own tasks, and didn't provide a solution to the non-existent problem. Work continues with cross-functional teams. A little external drama happens here and there. Week 5, everything is working fine, except one feature of the prototype build. This feature failure added another 30 to 70 man hours 2 days before our deadline. Man hours were used to justify cutting this feature and redistributing work for compiling work into a file and developing respective parts of a presentation. Overall, we basically saved 2 hours of discussion with 7 people, 14 man hours, by me overthinking for 2 hours alone to develop criteria to cut project activities based on man hour requirements. We ended with essentially meeting over 90% of our ambitious design goals by only working 2 8-hour-long days with the full team. That week we put in nearly 130 man hours into the project. You might be thinking that I expected the procrastination to be the major issue. You're not wrong. I genuinely was expecting that, and it did in fact happen. It's just that procrastination is expected. What was unlikely is that we expected all of our electronics parts to work more or less out of the box. One of them didn't, and we couldn't figure out why. The spec sheet said this, but it isn't working that way. That exact scenario was pre-planned to be an automatic cut feature criteria 5 weeks prior, because I'm inherently distrustful of many manufacturers. It just also happened to coincide with procrastination and a short argument that died the instant I pulled up my rabbit hole estimates. Seems like overthinking to me in hindsight, but I'm also far less experienced just by my age, so maybe this is a normal high likelihood problem. My father had tendencies to think he could go above reality and do what he wanted, so this is why a dumb trip was made during the time it happened, lol. As a child, having no choice, I had to ride on snowmobile with him. My mother was out of town and he really didn't like random people taking care of me. I was at her age, I understood things, but just not the age to be alone while he was gone. It was late winter, obviously not safe for ice traveling, but it was white snow and no signs of water, and as we are going across the ice on our way back home over ice we traveled on that day, I felt super weird. My stomach was just turning, and I felt very trapped in a big open space on the ice, as if the shore was not a achievable destination. I decided to stand on the seat and kneel, and shortly after the rear end looked like a boat does. The track was in water, and I was able to get on the surrounding ice without much of an issue. My legs got a bit wet. Sadly, my dad ended up going in the water and hanging on the edge of the ice I was on, and it was a super strong current. I remember him just cursing and cursing while a friend of his who was with us and went on that ice in front of us with no signs of water brought his Kamatic over for my dad to grab onto to be brought up to the ice. It wasn't as easy as somebody grabbing his arm to get him out. It was a scary 2 minutes. The snowmobile was retrieved over 60 yards away with only a maximum of 40-foot depth. The current there is no joke. A little bit up the way there is a beach called Death Beach because of the current, and a lot of folks died in that water. Not sure how this relates to the gut feeling part, but I couldn't leave it unfinished. I was working at an older credit union as a head teller a couple years back, and would always think about how, if we got robbed, what I would do. It was a pretty small credit union, so it was just known to the locals, and was right off the middle of a larger intersection. The literal day before I went over the robbery procedures, which hadn't been updated in more than 15 years, and redid all of them, since it was right before payday and I wasn't too busy. The morning of at 9:07 AM. We were robbed. I was filling out paperwork in the morning and trying to help members in the front lobby who were starting to come in, since we had just opened. A man approached and said, "Excuse me, sir," and I told him I would be right with him and didn't look up. He waited a second and said, "Put the money in the bag." I complied and gave him all of the lower denominations in my drawer at the time. He ran out and we ended up following our procedures perfectly. Locked down the credit union, held the people that were in there for witness statements, called the police, and they cleared the building. He ended up getting caught cause we got the color of his shoes and the license plate of his getaway car. It was amazing. I used to think about getting robbed every day and never truly thought it would happen, but I was actually prepared for that one, lol. I once had to adjudicate a student's expulsion hearing. Essentially, I was both judge and jury. There were a lot of rules and regulations that I wanted to follow fairly and to the letter, as this hearing would either end a student's academic career or result in someone entering a medical profession after having already been proven to have plagiarized coursework submissions twice and been accused of doing it a third time. It was extremely important to me, and to everyone involved, that this work be done to a very high standard. I spent days with those regulations, reviewing every detail from burden of proof to procedural regulations to what people could bring into the hearing. One of the things a student could choose to bring was a lawyer, so I talked myself through what to do in all sorts of cases: angry/disruptive student, intimidating lawyer, missing paperwork. I went into the hearing laughing a little at myself for wildly over preparing for what would probably be very simple. She brought a lawyer, a vocal, disruptive lawyer who imagined he was there to grandstand to a jury, and who raised objections at every turn. Fortunately, I knew from the regulations that he wasn't allowed to present arguments, only to advise his client, and, thank goodness, I had literally talked myself through what to say if that happened, so I was able to be calm, firm, and consistent through repeated outbursts on his part. The institution had their own lawyer in attendance as well. She said nothing throughout the proceedings, but as we were all leaving the room, she told me quietly that she was impressed with how well I ran it. Man, did that feel good. Early January 2020, I keep up with the news every day, and was following the COVID situation in Wuhan pretty closely. Mind you, we are in Southern California and most people were not entirely concerned as of yet. I kept telling my husband I think this is gonna be a big thing, and he just kept teasing me that I was getting paranoid lol. But I had already been meaning to create a home disaster kit for fires and earthquakes. I was just feeling so nervous about COVID and how we'd care for our toddler if she'd hit the fan in any way, since we don't have family nearby. So I started slowly building a stock over about 2 months without telling him. Shelf stable foods, my daughter's fav foods. She has autism and is highly picky. Meds, masks, diapers, etc. Nothing excessive, just enough to get us through a week or so if we ever lost power or were in a bad spot and couldn't leave the house. Suffice to say, when California was officially put on lockdown and the stores here were literally empty and Amazon couldn't deliver like anything inside 3 to 4 weeks, my husband stopped looking at me like I was completely crazy lol. Now we always have a stocked pantry and freezer, stocked first aid and meds, and an emergency kit. Plus our important docs and essentials are stored in such a way that they can easily be grabbed if we need to leave quick. I have a very strict eating schedule, especially when it comes to lunch, and if I'm not eating around 12:30 to 3 o'clock I start to feel sick. That being said, I'm always packing a snack when I know I'm gonna miss breakfast or lunch. I were in a summer camp around a mountain range, organized by one of my teachers, and there were a lot of young kids, and even the ones my age were really picky when it comes to food. For breakfast, before we'd leave, they'd give us a big plate full of an assortment of cheese, salami, and vegetables. Kids being kids and teenagers being teenagers, a lot of it would be left untouched. Cue me going around the table making sandwiches and picking up the dessert if there was any extra left. I'm talking 6 or 7 sandwiches. I was chubby, just in case we didn't make it to a restaurant or something for lunch. Of course people laughed at me, teachers included, for always carrying a lot of water, like 2 adults worth, and a lot of food along with everything else I needed. And of course there was one day when I got to say I told you so. One day we got lost on a trail, not a big deal. We just misread the signs and took the longer route, and instead of going for 2 hours or so, we walked for about 5 uphill. And when people finished their small bottles of water and started greeting hungry, you'd start hearing from left and right, "Hey, did you pack an extra sandwich I could have? I know you've been packing snacks. Care to share some with me? May I have a sip of water?" And so on and so forth. With every sandwich I'd give, they'd get a complimentary WHYREYOUALWA's talking for DWIT-HYUO. Never getting married. I'm 27, and I have never technically dated. I say technically, because last girl I was in love with back in college told me she loved me too. Everyone knew about us, our friends, more or less our families. At least that's what she told me. Only problem was she was in another department and had 1 year less than to graduate. So she had to move back to her hometown. Didn't want a long-term relationship, so we never officially declared we were in a relationship. It went on for about a year. Never had anything more than just a hug. Never felt the need to. That mutual thing was happiest I ever was, and it was the worst time of my life outside of that. I was still happy. Before leaving she asked for my hoodie as a keepsake. She gave me a tee that I loved on her. I was so in love with her. I proposed that we continue and make a long distance thing till I graduate, and then I'll come work wherever she will be then. I even offered her it to be an open relationship, just in case she thought she can't do it without physical presence. I was ready for any condition. I just wanted her. Right before leaving she went on a trip to nearby town with some of her childhood friends who had come to help her move back. After a couple of days of ignoring me, she called me and said that her friends were asking about me and why was I calling her so much. That she realized I'm not get boyfriend, so I shouldn't be calling her like that. Then next day she tells me casually she made out with a guy in the hotel room. I have had very rough time till then in college. I had been depressed, failed, humiliated and everything. That was when I cried for the first time in years. She used to say she loved me, and then she flipped on me like that. Call me crazy, but it didn't sit well with me, to say the least. Sometimes I think she did it to help me get over her. Who knows? It's been 7 to 8 years. I never dated again. Probably never will. So I'm prepared to never get married. Sorry for the long comment. Secretly recording an entire semester of anthropology lectures. I'm a art major at the local university where I live, but I have a lot of hobbies and extra interests, and so I added an earth science minor on top of it. One of the optional courses was a cultural anthropology class. I get there on the first day and the dude teaching it just gives me a vaguely Ike vibe, but I can't place why. He seemed like just another annoyed adjunct who looked like he could have been an extra on The Office, but I'm paranoid, so I started a voice recorder app on my phone in secret before every lecture. I live in a one-party consent state. I've looked it up for other incidents before. About halfway through the semester he starts dipping into some kinda racist stuff. Not anything super explicit, but enough I was a little more uncomfortable than I had been. A lecture later, he mentioned being a reformed racist/white supremacist, and that he was attempting not to think that way anymore. Here's the thing, good on him for making the attempt to change, but that doesn't mean I'm gonna trust him implicitly. People can and do change for the better, and it's definitely possible to change how you think. However, he always gave off the vibe that he was half-assing it, and that he was making this change due to a social pressure, and not necessarily a true change of heart. He'd said enough stuff by that point that another girl in my class was getting uncomfortable, and when I mentioned my recordings she said she felt a little safer. She was native, and concerned that he might flunk her on skin color alone. She was my study buddy and I knew she was working her ass off like the rest of us, so we kept an eye on her grades in comparison to my own. To his credit, he didn't fail anyone on skin color. The class itself was great, and we went over a lot of interesting niche subjects, but my Ike feeling was somewhat correct. I never had to send my recordings to anyone. He never said anything that was outright horrible. I hope he really wanted to change. Living with hate in your heart isn't a way to live. If he can stay out of that headspace, he'll stay a pretty decent professor. COVID. December/November of 2019 I started to get worried, as I have always followed the news pretty closely and have friends in China who had indicated it was going to be a really big issue. Told my family and friends, but they didn't think it was anything to be concerned about. After visiting a airport at the end of December I was convinced it was real and wouldn't accept being told I had anxiety. I kept reading the news, started wearing a mask everywhere by the beginning of February. I even got special accommodations at my university, so I could sit alone at a desk, usually seats 2 to 4 people, and arrived to all my classes early to disinfect the surfaces. I stocked up and bought a ton of N95s, Lysol, medication, food, and hand sanitizer. I even began to make my own prototypes for homemade masks with my sewing machine. I told all my family and friends what I thought was coming and to stock up, but everyone just humored me and told me I needed to relax. By March my anxiety about public transit and crowded uni hallways with COVID was so intense, I stopped going to school unless there was an in-person test. My family was genuinely concerned. I think they were getting ready to have me formally diagnosed by a psychiatrist. Strangers would ask me if I had OCD. I do not. I felt a little embarrassed, but I still thought I was right and tried to convince other people to listen to me. April came and my entire country went on lockdown. Everyone realized COVID was real. Tons of people reached out to tell me I was right, and quite a few apologized for saying I had OCD. I felt vindicated. I was so happy. Now no one thinks I'm crazy, and when I talk about the news people tend to listen to me. When I was working in a pharmacy, this was in 2018, there was once too many boxes of masks came by accident. Now, masks do have an expiry date. Usually N95s last 6 to 12 months, so understandably we were not too keen on keeping it. For anyone who has worked in retail, you'll know that shop space is very limited. That includes the back, which isn't a magical place that leads to Narnia. It's usually already full of stuff. In general, when too much of one stock arrives by accident, the protocol is to return it, and then we won't be charged for the stock. But in this case, the boss, remembering the SARS pandemic of 2004, told us to keep it. She said, "You can't ever be too careful. All you need is just another pandemic. Besides, it's not like they don't sell at all. Let's just keep them." Enter COVID-19, just a little over a year later. Addendum, the same pharmacy boss also stockpiles seemingly random stuff like diarrhea and flu medications. She always says that you can't have too much of these things. There was one time that there was a nationwide shortage of diarrhea medications, which again proved her right. She definitely didn't lose her shit over it. When my husband and I moved, it was to an area that has very bad thunderstorms and hurricanes and sometimes tornadoes. I had seen them before, but not nearly as severe as the area we were moving to. I talked to my husband about making bug-out bags for ourselves and our 2 cats, as well as an evacuation plan and a plan to get the cats into the carriers as fast as possible in case of an unrelated emergency. I was told I was overreacting, and while the state can have severe hurricanes, we aren't close enough to the coast for it to be much of an issue, and he was wrong. At my insistence, bought 4 backpacks and any kind of emergency supplies I thought we would need to last 3 days. I got them all packed, including the cats' bags with their food, water bottles, toys, disposable litter pans with litter inside, their whole works, and shoved everything into the hall closest. I practiced grabbing the cats and getting them into carriers as fast and safely as I could, and practiced getting everything out of the apartment and into the car efficiently and quickly. The following spring we were woken up by the building fire alarms going off and all my planning paid off. My husband grabbed the bug-out bags, and I got the cats in the carriers. They sleep on the bed with us, and didn't run at the fire alarm. I think we got lucky, and we had everything in the car in under 5 minutes. We were half dressed, but that hardly mattered to me at the time. We were out before anyone had gotten out of their apartments yet, so with everything safe in the car, we started banging on doors yelling about the fire. I ended up helping a woman carry one of her kids out, and my husband got a guy's 2 dogs leashed and out for him. It turns out a woman on the 3rd floor burned cookies, and it was only a small fire that was contained to her stove. As far as I know, there was no damage anywhere to the building, and after a couple hours we were able to go back to our apartments. My husband has never doubted me since, lol. In this thread I'm seeing people who are prepared for any situation, but not people who are overthinking social situations. I constantly second guess my conversations, and things like writing an email or a text message take me significantly longer than it should. If someone catches me off guard I freeze. I can't speak until I've been given enough time to think about my words. Usually I think about all the worst case scenarios and end up figuring out exactly what not to say. Like this time at work I got in trouble for ignoring my boss's requests for something I didn't want to do. I knew I was well within my rights to not do X, and I also knew my boss didn't care about my rights. I spent the entire time she reprimanded me thinking of all the awful things I could say, and when it came time to talk I said the one thing she didn't expect. Well, if it's really that bad that I didn't do X, maybe the store manager should know about it. She smirked like, "You dumb fuck, you just got yourself fired." So she set up a meeting with the store manager later that day. While I waited, I thought of all the ways I could fuck this up. Ultimately, I went into that meeting and laid it down in the most eloquent way that I knew the employee handbook from front to back and that my boss was trying to bully me into doing X to look good. Within a few weeks, my boss was demoted to manage a much smaller department and I was basically in my own league. Managers were afraid to ask anything more from me beside basic duties, and as long as customers were happy. To be clear, X was not normal job duties. That meant coworkers had to pick up slack. X was asking customers to donate to some charity run by the store. Nowhere in the manual did it say I had to ask for donations, and the next year the store policy became no asking for donations after the first week, which I was fine with. Asking for donations actually angered customers because they had been asked so many times. I actually got just as many donations not asking as other part-time employees. One customer even donated $100 and said, "I come to your line because you don't ask me for money every day." Too many to list. I don't know if it's overthinking or over-preparing because I prepare for so much, and when it happens, people who are with me are surprised to see me quickly resolve the situation. It can be as simple as having a plastic poncho for the rain, an inflatable pillow plus 2 blankets, water plus protein bars, or something more niche like having plier cutters in my car. I also always have backup glasses everywhere. My nicest/newest ones are always where I dwell, and the rest are all over the place. My car, my backpack, my office, my romantic partners, or if single, my friends, house, etc. I don't know how many times they've came in handy. I'm always imagining the worst situation and prepping for that while hoping for the best. I think the last time the worst event happened was school related. Long story short, there was a popular field trip we'd go to at the end of the year for a competition. Because of how things were going, there was a chance that it was going to be cancelled. Because of this, I prepped to go alone. I made sure never to miss class, to use sick days, and not lose points for missing school. I researched how much a car rental would cost, asked peers from other schools if I could crash with them at their hotel. I made sure to rent out a sizable SUV to have room to sleep there if I couldn't find a place to crash, and etc etc etc. There was a month left before the start of the competition. Our extracurricular activity team still hadn't made a decision yet. I knew the price for the car, the plane, and had a place to crash. I decided to bluff. I talked to the team captains, told them that I already booked the flight, etc. They were pissed. They admitted that they were waiting to ease into telling us that our team wouldn't be attending the competition. I left and booked everything. The flight, the car, the room favor. Plus, early in my career I drove a taxi cab. One night I'm driving a guy home from a bar. All's good and we are having pleasant small talk on the way. It's dark and the roads are mostly bare. Had to stop for a red light, though basically useless at that time of night. We're chatting and the light turns green. I'm staring out the window, listening to him talk. He says, "Hey, the light's green." I'm still staring out the window, deep in thought, not taking off. He says again, "Hey, the light's green." Without looking away from the window, I said, "Watch this." The car I had been watching approach from the other direction. The one that looked like it wasn't slowing down must have suddenly noticed he had a red light. With only a car length or two before the light, the other driver slammed on his brakes hard. The big ol' boxy car skids into the intersection, tires screaming and smoking. By the time the car came to a rest, its end was in a race with its front, so it ended up stopped at an angle right in front of us. As the echoes of the long screech died down, the night fell silent again. Smoke wafted away from the car's tires, boxy body still rocking on its springs. Just as the echoes die out, suddenly the guy claps me on the shoulder and exclaims something to the effect of, "Holy shit, I thought you weren't paying attention." I just chuckled and said, "No, man, this is what you pay me for." My dad is a firefighter. Growing up we always had a map on the fridge showing where outside everyone was supposed to meet if the house ever caught fire. I used to ride along if there was a fire close by, hand out bottled water to the firemen. I have always slept with at least a t-shirt and PJ pants on. My logic was, if your house is on fire, the last thing you want is to have to stand outside naked and watch it burn. Every night before I lay down, I take keys, wallet, and phone, put them in my shoes, and put my shoes by my side of the bed. One night I wake up and see smoke pouring in from under the door. I knew exactly what to do. I jumped up, grabbed my shoes, quickly opened the window, and pushed the screen out, and climbed out the window. Then I put my keys and wallet in my pocket and dialed 911 as I put my shoes on. I ran over and moved my car out of the driveway so that the fire truck could pull in closer to the house. SMH, this is where it all went to shit. I can hear sirens in the distance, and suddenly I see the lights come on through the window of my 6-year-old son's bedroom. Yeah. Probably should have updated my fire escape plan when he was born. Panicked, I run to the front door. It's locked, and I realized then that I've locked my keys in the car by accident. So I run to the back door, also locked. Then I think, if the police can kick in the front door serving a no-knock warrant, then it can't be that hard to do. That's another story. I was allegedly selling marijuana. I run back around to the front door and I see my son is standing on the porch eating the nastiest, most burnt bag of popcorn. SMH. So he had decided to make popcorn at 2 AM and microwaved it way too long. He saw the smoke and just went back to bed. I'm guessing he thought he wouldn't get in trouble if he acted like it wasn't him. I had done all of this because of burnt popcorn. Luckily the fire dep got there and 2 guys helped break into my car to get my keys, and 2 other firemen brought the microwave outside and plugged it into the outlet on the light pole and popped a bag of popcorn for the recommended amount of time, and I sat there as they roasted me for like 30 minutes while my son climbed all over the fire truck. Moral of the story is, abortion is green. Thanks. Good night. Didn't happen to me, but my grandfather. 4 years, every time he had to travel outside the city he would have a full tank of gas and full spare can, even if he only had to go to the next town around 20 kilometers. One winter he was driving alone back home. It was late at night, with a light snowfall. Because of the conditions, it just happened that he was driving behind a bus full of kids returning from a school trip. That was before the age of cell phone, kind of important to keep in mind. Suddenly the light snowfall turned into a storm. Wind blew more snow from the side of the road and both my grandfather and the bus were stuck in the middle of nowhere. My grandfather knew that they will probably have to wait until the morning before the roads are cleared, so he turned off his engine to preserve fuel. After a few hours he notices that the bus, which had its engine running all that time, had stopped. My grandfather got out of the car, went to the bus to check on them. As he suspected, the bus had ran out of gas. The cheap bus company had enough fuel to get them to their destination. It must have been around midnight, with at least 6 to 8 hours before help could have arrived. So my grandfather did the only thing a decent human being would do in that moment. He stayed out in the cold, allowing the kids to take turns warming up in the car. When help arrived in the morning, they were all alive and well. TLDR, my grandfather got stuck in a snowstorm with a bus full of kids and kept them warm because he refused to leave the city limits without a full tank of gas. Oh dear, I have plenty. I'm very paranoid. The biggest ones that stick out are as follows. A few years ago, aboard me decided to order a set of lockpicks online and learned how to pick basic locks. In my prime, I could pick every lock in our house in under a few minutes each. I carried these picks with me every day and have broken into 5 of my friends' houses when they forgot keys. The place I worked at twice when the managers didn't bother showing up. A bedroom in my new apartment that a previous tenant left dead bolted in my parents' back door that they lost the key to. The second and most recent validation of my ceaseless paranoia involved the power going out when my wife was still pregnant. Naturally, the only solution to this was to kit every room with a battery-powered touch light and install 3 battery-operated remote-controlled lights in the 3 most important rooms in the house: nursery, living room, and bedroom. Along with this, I purchased 3 flashlights, a white gas camping stove for cooking and heating bottles, and a battery-powered LED lantern. Sure enough, last week a tornado came through early in the morning. Without hesitation I hit the remote. I had command stripped to the wall right by the bed, and we had light to collect the babies. We had twins, and move them to the bathroom. Afterwards we didn't even need the flashlights due to the touch lights and lantern. Fortunately we didn't need to use the stove, but the $80 I spent on supplies was completely validated. And even if it's the only time we ever have to use them, I'd spend that money again in a heartbeat. In an uncontrollable situation like that, just having light and a way to feed your children gives you all the peace of mind you need, and I highly recommend getting your home set up in the same fashion. Earthquake. Or rather, what to do in case of an earthquake. As a kid, was traumatized by the coverage of a devastating earthquake. Led me to overthinking about what to do in case of an earthquake. Fast forward a few years and we experienced an earthquake which racked up a massive body count. 3 seconds into the earthquake, I already knew what it was, no prior experience of a trembler, and rushing to move my family to safety. Needless to say, everyone in the family ended up safe. I think this is more significant than the other incident, when a poisonous snake moved into our kitchen. A neighbor who was called in to assist finding the snake pulled a Houdini, after being sighted by my mum close to midnight. Suggested that we take it on ourselves when we found it coiled up under the sink as he thought it was a harmless tree snake. One look at the snake, was about 10 years old then, told my dad that it was one of the 4 poisonous snakes native to the region. Dad heeded my advice and we waited for animal control till morning. The animal control guy couldn't believe that it was a full-grown adult male. According to him, the snake is native but extremely rare. He said that if we had tried to mess with it, it had enough poison to kill everyone in the house, including the stupidest neighbor, and a temper to see it through. Haha, this is a sad story, but I worked with a guy for years, 2007 to 2010, and we were good friends, and spent a lot of time hanging out outside of work. I secretly liked him, however he had a girlfriend. His relationship with her was never that stable, so I'd always hoped he'd break up with her and decide to go out with me. However, there was also a girl the same age as me working with us who he wasn't as close to, but still friendly with. She was very attractive, and I was afraid they'd one day become close and start dating each other. I'd try my best to keep them apart, or spend time with him where possible by swapping shifts, so that he and I could work together. I'd suddenly got a really bad bout of food poisoning and was hospitalized. I spent a week in hospital, and in that time, he visited me at the hospital with that girl we worked with. After they saw me, they had lunch together at the hospital cafeteria, and realized they had a connection. Within a few weeks he'd broken up with the girlfriend, and was dating her. I'd been right in my thinking this would happen, but I wouldn't say I was prepared for that. It still fucking hurt. I got a new job soon after, and grew apart from them. They invited me to their wedding years later, and for some dumb reason I did attend. Single. It still hurt, 9 or so years later, to see what I missed out on. Back in 2010, crime was booming in my city. I often fantasized of what would I do if someone were to follow me home in their car, so I studied my colony, learned the streets, shortcuts and escape routes. One day, I was coming back home and noticed a car tailing me. I remembered my dad saying that I needed to take 4 turns in the same direction to confirm it, and they did follow. It was on. I acted quickly. There was no one home, so I called a friend of mine that lived nearby, told him the situation, asked if he could turn off his lights and open the door. He said it was okay, and that he was going to wait for me. I continued driving normally for 2 or 3 minutes. I didn't want it to raise any suspicion. There's a huge hill nearby my house. You need to go into second gear, and if you don't have good tires, it can be a little challenging to climb, and I was counting on that. So I did. I saw that they followed a couple of meters back, so when I was on top of the hill, they were just begging to climb it. Seeing this, I rushed downhill, drove through the neighborhood at a really dangerous speed, taking the shortcuts that I'd practiced before. I knew they were still tailing me, but I bought some time making them climb that hill. I arrived to my friend's house, parked 3 houses away. He was waiting for me at the front door. I got out of the car and closed it as I ran for the door. We got in, locked the door and waited. Not a minute after that, the car drove in front of the house, looking for me, but I was already safe. So yeah, overthinking literally saved my life. So, OE day, when I was living with my mother, to help her during her fight against cancer, his companion started being very aggressive, and one time hit me, because of a not clean table, which was his fault by the way, since we didn't eat that morning. Later on that day, I took the bus, to get to the library getting curriculum printed, and trying to find a job. Regular routine back in the day. Except I told about my family how I felt about the situation. And they snitched. Like they blatantly told my mom how I felt wronged, being hit for such a silly thing, when I told them not to say that, because otherwise the asshole would kick me out. After the first few calls that day, before I arrived at the library I was out of battery, so no contact with anyone until evening. Went back to home, and I immediately knew something was off. Pack your bags. Get the fuck out. That was the asshole speaking. So they told you about it, damn right they did. Get out. You know you're in the wrong here. You have no right hitting me. You have no right downgrading me all the time. Oh, and good thing you kicked me out, since you wouldn't get Q share of what I'll earn starting tomorrow. I then proceeded to pack my bags until he blocked me in my room and processed to beat me again. Once was packed though, I noped the shit out of that place. Emergency plan was on, baby. Called a few friends, got transport, since his was off service that evening, got to a hotel, and slept there for a few days. My friends took good care of me, buying me some food and necessity I couldn't bring with me. I sold a few goods, like books and less necessary stuff, so I could change phone. I changed mail address. I got a flat thanks to the emergency youth housing plan in my country that I've been setting up weeks ago, because I saw that coming. Since then, I'm free. I don't know what happened to them, and I quite frankly don't give a shit. I don't have to overthink anymore. I live my life with nobody being violent in my close entourage. And I feel good because of that. I'm glad I overthought me getting kicked out. I was hired by a firm that was worried their IT manager was going to screw up their move to a new building. After reviewing the plan and looking for risks, there were a lot of obscure risks, but with high severity outcomes. For example, everything was moving in one truck, which means each node of their database clusters would be in the same truck, their backup would be in the same truck, etc. There was also no provisions made if reassembling their IT infrastructure took more time than expected and went past the open of business on Monday morning. When I worked out a detailed plan with critical path and dependencies, it was obvious his plan had to room for anything to go wrong. The level of detail and planning was superficial at best, and I picked up on a couple early red flags, like the new data center having the wrong power outlets installed for the UPS models that were moving. I made recommendations to mitigate these risks, which, of course, added cost to the move. Backups had to go in a separate vehicle and be safely on site at the new location before anything at the old location was shut down. Any redundant equipment, like database clusters, network stacks, firewall clusters, etc. had to go in separate truckloads with the first load delivered before the second could be loaded. Detailed plans were made for each system, so even if the IT guy died, we could call in additional resources from my company and get the job done. Dry runs through the plans helped refine them. The additional planning cost tens of thousands of dollars in billable hours, but the CEO saw the risk and understood our value. The IT manager argued against the need for all of them and really took offense to the lack of trust his senior leadership had in him and his abilities. Although we had to work together on this move, our relationship was adversarial and somewhat combative. The only way we managed to function at all was because I had convinced him that if he followed my planning and anything went wrong, it would be my throat to choke and not his. On the day of the move, the expected rain unexpectedly turned to freezing rain and then became an ice storm. The move still occurred, but took twice as long as planned. One truck, containing one half of the IT equipment, slid off the road and into a swamp. Equipment was damaged. The ice storm caused a massive blackout, so we had no power until late Sunday night, delaying reassembly. Every contingency plan was activated, every available resource was put on the project, and, by 9 AM Monday, every system was back online and operational, even if resiliency and performance were degraded. 9/10 times it would have been a smooth move and the strategy of shut it down, load it into a truck, and load it, power it on, would have worked, but in this case, that truck driving into a swamp could have taken the business with it. I always overthink health and safety at work. Worked for a small company manufacturing industrial pressure washing systems. The largest product we made was a complete 500L tank, pump, and engine mounted on a trailer. The chassis for the trailer was made from a 7.5 meter long 7 in diameter metal tube that was bent into a U-shape. Once these were bent, we'd stand them up on the open ends against a wall, stacking them in front of each other until each line was about 10 deep. I always said that one day someone was gonna catch the bottom of one of these and cause the whole lot to fall on top of them, so we needed to put a chain or something that we can run across to prevent this from happening, but the boss didn't give a shit. So one day one of my colleagues we called Lil John was moving a ride-on mower and caught the wheel against the side of one. Me being ready for this shit to happen launched into action and dragged his ass off the mower with inches to spare before a couple tons of metal came crashing down, completely flattening the mower. Safe to say I left that place after seeing how little the boss cared about our safety. So I'm crazy OCD with my house keys, wallet, and phone. I carry them around with me everywhere I go, even when I'm inside the house. My wife often makes fun of me as it seems silly to carry my keys and wallet in my pocket to the bathroom, garage, etc. I don't know why, but I just feel uneasy if I'm missing them in my pockets. Anyway, my wife and I went up to the family vacation property 4 weeks ago to de-winterize and check on things for my grandfather. The day was very warm for the season, plus 10 degrees C, but the nights still dipped down to -3 or lower and still snowed. One of the days, my wife and I were mostly outside, and because it was so warm, we only wore a long sleeve shirt and jeans/leggings for either of us. I had a nice campfire going, and we spent that evening sitting by the fire in our light pants and shirts. 9 o'clock rolls around, and it's getting pretty darn cold. The fire has kept us warm, but it's dying down, so we get up and go to head inside when I remember my wife had the house keys. I go to open the door and I realize the door was locked. I ask her where the house keys are, and she says on the counter in the kitchen. Why? I look inside the window and sure enough, there is our only set of keys, sitting on the counter inside the window. Unfortunately I broke my rules that day and my car keys were in the cottage as well, but at least my phone and wallet were with me still. Long story short, the property is pretty far from any civilization and is basically 1 to 2 hours driving and probably 1/2 to 1 day walking to a nearby town. We also had no neighbors home at that time and we were 4 or so hours from anyone we knew. So we were pretty stuck. And it was staring to dip down to 0 degrees. Cold and a bit worried I had to figure out how to get in. I decided to try jamming my expired Costco card in the door jamb, which worked perfectly. It pushed the door pin in, and inside the cottage we went. It could have been much worse and expensive if I did not obsessively carry my wallet and phone with me, except keys that day apparently, and we would have had to break a window to get in or wait for someone to save us. She no longer makes fun of me. Edit. Writing my story I forgot the question exactly. Technically speaking I was unprepared for this situation, but I would have been if I was able to be OCD that day. I had a girlfriend in college who lived across the country. We started dating in high school and thought nothing of the difficulties of managing a long-term relationship while in the UAL climax of our lives. It involved a lot of video messages and FaceTime calls, but we managed to keep each other usually satisfied. Hurting was elaborate, and she always had a novel way of masturbating while filming it for my pleasure. She was also extremely generous with her wealth. Like she would buy me takeout every day. We would watch movies while on the phone and she would surprise me with Chinese food delivered to my door. I was under the impression she had access to her parents' credit card and they just never checked the transactions. I was wrong. When she came to visit me on spring break, we were out to eat at the Chinese place when I said I would pay for dinner and would not accept her parents picking up the tab. She insisted that her parents had no access to her credit card and that it was entirely hers. I guess there were some other things that raised my suspicions, but her behavior that trip just made me feel like something was going on. I got nosy and began snooping through her email Turns out she was a cam girl with a pretty decent following. All the videos I had been enjoying were not my own and were intended for some other person's viewing pleasure. There were also several videos of her straight up faking other dudes, as well as videos of her faking me. Needless to say, we are no longer together TLDR, caught my long distance girlfriend cheating / cam girling, and was basically a cybercuck for 2 years. The pandemic. Personally prepared, but the awesome thing was that I prepared my company fully. I've gotten so many kudos for what I did. I'm a CEO in a largish law firm. In January I started watching China and getting concerned. In late Jan I started sending staff home with laptops to test remote working and started preparing for office closures. My boss thought I was nuts, but trusts me, so he let me do it. The users were scratching their heads at first, but were happy to get a work from home day back then. By mid to late February we had a fully tested action plan for long-term or permanent remote working. We knew where users would struggle and where they wouldn't. Everything from talking about their Wi-Fi and ISPs to equipment. I got my firm to provide all computers and most accessories, to training on usage to adjusting departmental workflows. It was awesome. I had a great team executing it as well. In the end we were weeks ahead of our competitors when our state shut down. With few exceptions, attorneys and staff transitioned smoothly. No disruption to client work. We had an incredibly profitable year. It was such an intentional success. I've been doing this a long time and that has been most satisfying point of my career. I'm not the type to say I told you so to people, but there were a lot of people questioning why I was putting so much effort into the prep, and more than a few came back and mentioned it. It's not incredibly unlikely, but was very satisfying for me at the time. I have carried hand sanitizer with me all the time for almost 15 years. Being quite a klutz, I also carry band-aids, which have been very useful on many occasions. When I was 15 I went on a day trip with my class, and everybody was making fun of me for being too obsessed about hygiene. We stopped in the park within a museum right before lunch, waiting for orders to move to have our sandwiches elsewhere. There was a super cute and very amicable kitten and we all could not resist petting him. They tell us we will have to eat there, because we cannot move at that moment. That's when everybody had the horrifying realization that the museum's bathroom was out of order and we all just pet a stray cat. So trying my best to hide my grin, I sit down comfortably and open my bag to get my hand sanitizer. I stare intensely into the eyes of the people that were mocking me earlier and thoroughly clean my hands. You can believe there was a queue and everybody asked for forgiveness and for a bit of the sanitizer. I gave it to everyone but clearly told them I would expect never to hear another sound about my hygiene obsession from any of them. All of last year, even before COVID hit America, I was worried my dad would die. Everyone told me how ridiculous this was. Everyone told me how it was just my anxiety. My therapist told me it was just my anxiety. He was 46 and in good shape. His BMI was normal. He had an active job, but still I was really worried about it. I remember at one point last summer asking about his life insurance policy at work and if he had a will / where we could find it. I begged him repeatedly to get a checkup and to be more careful with COVID restrictions. Those last two caused a lot of arguments. After my grandmother died earlier that year I made sure to ask what he would want if we had to make medical decisions for him. We talked about what funeral arrangements he wanted. 2 weeks later he had a mild case of COVID, and then 3 weeks later had a massive heart attack and his heart stopped in the living room. My brother did compressions until the paramedics could bring him back. My brother and I had to call the shots on that one, and at one point had been told to make a decision on an LVAD for him. He ended up taking a turn for the worst, so we let him go, but would have anyway, because of his insistence he not live plugged into a machine. We had him cremated. His exact words were, "I don't care what you do with my body, whatever y'all want," and sits on my mantle. We're having an outdoor memorial for him this summer when more of the family has been vaccinated. It really sucked. He ended up having a situation almost identical to the one my grandmother had on my mom's side only weeks before, down to the same surgeries and use of an impeller device. As soon as I heard they did the impeller from my brother, I knew he would die, and he did about 40 hours later. His death was still awful for me, but I'm glad that I was prepared for what he wanted and never once had to question if we made the right decisions. It is really important to talk to your loved ones about their end of life care, even if nobody thinks it will happen anytime soon. Since I was a child, always had a fear of being in a store and having it robbed, being held hostage. For years I've always gone over every scenario possible and what I would do in each case. For example, I would think, what if I was in a gas station and buy the sodas and someone came in the front door with a gun? I had a plan that I would push the sodas through the cooler, as the other side is a cooler where they stock it. I assumed that the cooler where they stocked it must have an access door that they load the products and that would be my escape. For years before bed and even driving, I would think of different scenarios, what I would do or say, and how I would escape. 2 years ago I was in a CVS. This is a store which has a pharmacy, small amount of food products, cosmetics etc. I was ironically by the soda/wine area, but had a straight view of the front door where the doors slide open and one enters. These two early 20s men came in, and I immediately had this gut-sinking feeling they were going to rob the damn place. I hit panic mode and left right out of the door they came in. When I got in my car I felt like a dumb ass because I heard nothing, and it's not like they came running out after or anything. So I still needed the products and drove 15 miles to another damn store to get said products. 2 days later on our neighborhood app, Next Door, the title talked about the CVS robbery. The two men who came into the store did rob the place. They first went to the pharmacy in the back, which was closed, hence them walking into the store and not immediately going to the cashier. They then went, scoped out the place, pulled a gun on the front cashier who happened to be ex-military. This checkout guy I've seen a ton of times and he's just a shorter kind of stocky guy. The cashier asked that the guys let his employees and customers leave and they agreed surprisingly. He then attacked the main guy with a gun, pulling the gun away, and both men fled into the apartment buildings next to the store, where they were hiding, and caught by police. I could not sleep that night. The other issue is I suffer from OCD, so I feel like if I think things now they are all of a sudden going to come true. I know this is not logical, but since the robbery I've had these major asinine scenarios pop into my head which prevent me from carrying on with some normal life activities. Example, I can't go past my knees in our ocean with my kids as I've had several thoughts of sharks attacking my kids and me having to provide a tourniquet for their limb. Overthinking to the point where I specifically wear bathing suits that have a string long and thick enough on it to be a successful tourniquet if needed. I know I need some meds and therapy for sure, but my fellow overthinkers know the plague of a constant racing mind. I don't know if these two will count, but here we go. I used to work in hours and part of my job was preparing and standardizing job applications as they came in, before passing them along to the hiring committee. One day, we got one from a woman who had previously lived in another state and worked as a psychiatrist. She then had a 6-year gap in her resume before applying now to be an office assistant. It was fairly normal to see a gap in women's resumes like that. They cold had a child and decided to stay home until the child started school. No biggie. And hey, people move all the time, so that could be explained away too. But why would a psychiatrist now want to be an office assistant? That's such a downgrade, and we were a government agency, so the pay was terrible. I googled her, which was not part of our standard procedure. I'd never done it for an applicant before nor since. But something just wasn't right and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Turns out she had defrauded Medicare out of millions of dollars and lost her license. That 6-year gap in her resume was her prison sentence. Background info: during my mom's second marriage, my older stepbrother abused me in multiple ways. Thankfully we eventually got out of that situation, but we currently only live an hour away from those people, so we are very much still looking over our shoulders. About 4 years ago, I randomly got a phone call from some guy. I thought it was a wrong number until he said, "Do you know ex-stepbrother?" I panicked, said no, and blocked the number. I didn't recognize the voice, and ex-stepbrother has a fairly common name, so my mom kept telling me to calm down. It probably was truly a wrong number and the name was just a coincidence. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Had he found me? I thought he was currently in jail for some other unrelated offense. I googled the phone number. It was a cell phone registered to some random woman in a town nearby. That just made the whole thing seem weirder. Googled her name until I found her Facebook. She's dating someone. Click onto his Facebook. Most recent status says he's just out of jail, glad to see his girlfriend and their kids, and get his life back on track. He was in the same jail as ex-stepbrother. Changed my phone number and I don't give it out to anyone, except close family members now. Anyone else can email me. Was I being paranoid and weird doing all that googling? Sure, but I was right. It allowed me to take steps to protect myself. Haven't heard or seen a peep from him since. In preparation for a trip to Germany in my mid-20s, my buddy and I met a couple German girls who were visiting LA and just happened to stop by our local watering hole. We told them about our forthcoming trip and asked them for a few handy phrases to use. After many drinks, the suggestions went from useful to crass and obnoxious pickup lines. One of the more douchey phrases happened to be, "Do you have a sister? Haha." Fast forward to a month later, my buddy and I are having a great time visiting Amsterdam and squeeze into a full train back to Berlin. On the train, we met up with a bunch of local football hooligans who were sitting atop cases of beer and drinking rowdily. We soon became fast friends in spite of the obvious language barrier. They shared their beer, curious to chat it up with some stoned Americans. We traded stories and eventually became the entertainment for the whole train car. At one point, one of the locals lamented that he was always getting carded because he looked young, and his ID made him look even younger. His friends made him pass his ID around for a quick laugh at his baby face. When it came to me, I couldn't contain my burst excitement. In perfectly confident German, I boldly asked aloud, "Hast du eine Schwester? Do you have a sister?" The whole train went silent in surprise at my sudden mastery of the language, and then erupted in boisterous laughter. Prost. I call it a worst case scenario state of mind mixed with a be prepared sheet from Boy Scouts. And it does come in handy more than I'd like. The most notable was when I was over at a friend's apartment with a few folks. It wasn't a very nice apartment complex, and her wall neighbors were, well, trash people. I'm talking bad parenting, huge parties, guns, bad drugs, coke, crack and meth, not the fun stuff, fights, and mega drama arguments. Of course we enjoyed eavesdropping them dramas, like some Jerry Springer shit right outside the door every day. One night, we were enjoying one such argument, and it started getting very heated. It turned physical, as they usually do. There was pushing, screaming, banging into sheet, stuff breaking, etc. Then we heard one of the chicks scream, "Put the gun away." And that was all I needed cause I was absolutely prepared. I grabbed my friend and her two roommates and pulled them back to the farthest point in the apartment, the master suite closet, and we huddled in there for a little while. "This is ridiculous. Why are we in the closet?" my friend's roommate asked. Didn't even need to answer, as two shots go off, followed by three more in quick succession. Friend calls the cops, and we wait for the all clear once they get there. It was a terrifying few minute wait, but we were all good thankfully. When we got the all clear from the operator, we came out to give our statements. Turned out two of the shots came into the apartment. One went through the door and lodged in a wall stud in the living room. The other went through two walls before lodging into her room at armoire. Can't confirm whether or not anyone would have been hit by the strays, but it was well worth a weird closet hang for a while nonetheless. So yeah, the idea was to put as much solid mass between us and the gun. And I would call it a success in every measure. So if you're in a similar situation and can't do anything else about it, put as much between you and a bullet as you can. I don't think I overthink things. I'm just prepared. I like to cook greasy food. I live in the South. We deep fry everything. Naturally, grease fires are a potential risk. After a set a paper plate and fire as a kid, I took fire safety in the kitchen rather seriously. Nothing happens except for the last of the maple breakfast sausage ending up in the sink. Fast forward 15-ish years, I'm married and my wife is deep frying fresh chicken nuggets when she gets the pan and stove completely on fire. She freaks out, screaming and jumping. I walk in, slightly annoyed that dinner is on fire, open the cabinet, where I keep the dollar store brand baking soda, dump it on the stove, drop the lid on the pot, and then nonchalantly ordered a pizza. 2 for the price of 1. I'm always checking escape paths when driving. Where do I go if this happens? What do I do if that happens? Etc. Christmas Eve, 2016. Came to a stop due to emergency vehicles. Saw the flash of headlights in my rear view. Caught the dip of a vehicle slaying their brakes too late. I gunned my van, cranked the wheel to the left, and pressed back into the seat, head contacting the headrest. I was able to point my vehicle away from the car right front of me before being struck by a VW Passat doing 60. The impact picked up the rear end of my vehicle, spun me around, pushed me within 4 inches of oncoming traffic, ripped off the number entirely, ripped the bolts hoping the trailer hitch clean out, snapped the welds off my exhaust to the muffler, and compacted the passenger side by nearly an inch. I had 0 injuries save for some slight whiplash and aggravating old injuries/operations. In college, I worked at a little mom and pop sandwich shop located next door to a bank in a strip mall in SoCal. The bank semi-frequently got robbed, and being the overthinker that I am, I would run through scenarios in my head of what I would do if someone ever tried to rob us. We had a silent alarm, but it required a specific code number. 9, which you had to manually input, located in the office, but not by the cash register. The control panel for the alarm also had a code for the doorbell that rang every time someone entered or exited the shop. One day this guy came in, who I had seen a few times before. I'm at the register, and he walks up, pulls his shirt up to expose the handgun nestled in his waistband, and said, "Please give me the money in there," nodding to the register. My stomach dropped, and I'm lost for a second, but then I calmly ask my coworker behind me to enter code 9 to shut off the doorbell. This at least triggers the silent alarm, while I open the register and hand him the few 20s, 10s and 5s in there. I did not lift up the cash drawer itself, so the rolls of change, and a few 100s and 50s and checks stayed safe in there. He takes the money, says thank you, I'm sorry, and leaves. The police show up a moment later. We filed a report and whatnot, but I don't think he was ever caught. I actually felt a little bad for the guy. He was so polite, and I could tell this was the last resort for him. I'm so glad it was me at the register, and not other members of my crew, who may not have handled it well. It could have gone very badly for all of us. I still think of him sometimes, and wonder what he needed the money for, and if he's okay. And I still remember the sinking feeling of seeing that gun, and what might have happened if I had handled the situation differently. Our house was getting renovated, and my husband and I were expecting our first child. Most of our belongings and new baby stuff were in boxes in our bedroom, so our bedroom was off limits. No work needed to be done in there anyways. It was otherwise empty in our 2-bedroom house. The renovation was supposed to have been completed well before the baby arrived. As the weeks passed, it was more and more apparent that our general contractor was never going to finish the renovation by the agreed upon date. With every delay that pushed the finish date to weeks after our baby was due, I got more and more worried. I wondered what was going to happen in the house while we were in the hospital having the baby. We never needed to worry about home security before. Something just didn't sit right, and I just kept getting a really bad feeling. So, I bought both wired and wireless security cameras to monitor the inside and outside of our home. Everybody said I was worrying over nothing. We didn't have anything of value, so nobody is going to steal anything. I got a lot of shit, but I stood my ground. Before I could get all the cameras set up though, I had a medical emergency and had to go to the hospital early to deliver the baby. I called my husband at work to tell him that it was time, and he asked me what I needed. I told him, I need you to finish setting up those cameras. He didn't want to initially, but I was able to persuade him to spend the extra hour at home so he could finish the setup. When he arrived at the hospital, he showed me everything. I made sure the feed and notifications came through to my cell phone. A few days later, we are still at the hospital, but now we have a new addition to our family. I get a notification on my cell phone. Someone is in our bedroom. A solo subcontractor is caught on video going through one of my drawers. I can't leave the hospital because of obvious medical reasons. My husband can't leave because pandemic rules are in place. Once he leaves the ward, he is not allowed to return. I emailed the video clip to the GC with the message that I want the panty raider off my property. My husband sends the clip to his dad, who rushes over and makes sure the guy isn't trying to abscond with my belongings. Police show up. The GC shows up. The guy denies even entering the room until my Phil shows the video. Apologies from everyone to us. But most importantly, I get the sweet "you were right honey" from my husband to me and prove to my in-laws that I wasn't unreasonably paranoid. Best money I ever spent. TLDR, bought a home security system to monitor house while I was in hospital. It catches a guy going through my drawers looking for drawers. Have you ever wanted to take a dump on your boss's desk? Well, my mother did just that. Here's a story. So, I worked for a local newspaper company as a mid-level manager. I was basically in charge of being sure that all the actual newspaper carriers were doing their jobs right. The company basically expected me to be sure all the carriers had working vehicles, otherwise I would have to drive the routes myself. I knew at the time that one carrier who had 3 routes, totaling 250-ish miles a day, had just had her truck repoed and would not be able to do her job without help. I asked around for a car to borrow with no luck. As a last resort, I talked my own mother into letting her borrow my now deceased dad's truck with a guarantee that my mother would be reimbursed by the company for whatever miles that the truck was driven. Originally, the carrier borrowing the truck was only supposed to need it for a work day or 2. Well, after 2 weeks she was still using the truck. One day during that time my mother and I had a conversation where I said I bet money that my boss / the company will back out of guaranteeing the mileage reimbursement money and we will end up with nothing. Her response was something to the effect of "they'll be hearing from me personally if they do." Sure enough, 6 weeks into the carrier using the truck, I get called into the office and I'm told that the company can no longer guarantee any money for the use of the truck. Of course my mother was not happy. But my boss told me that he would personally be standing there when that carrier got her next paycheck and would have his hand out to get a personal check for the amount due at the time of over $1,600. Payday came, and turns out he did not do what he said he would, and it would now be up to me to get our money. Now a little background on my mother. She recently had a colostomy surgery to repair whatever. Since then she's had to wear a colostomy bag and will continue to have to wear one until her next surgery to reattach everything. So anyway, after the 6 weeks, my boss tells me to give the carrier an ultimatum, get her sheet together and find a car or we'll be taking my mother's truck back and she loses her job. My mother and I have several more conversations about what she would do if she doesn't get the money that's due. I also decided that if the carrier gets fired, then I would quit too because I wasn't willing to do 3 more routes on top of my original job. Ultimatum time comes and goes. 8 weeks total of the carrier having the truck later. The mileage bill ends up being over $2,100. We go and pick up the truck, and I had put in my 2 weeks notice. The last day I was working, my mother walks in the front door to the office, as if she was a customer. I immediately knew shit was fixing to hit the fan. She walks right into my boss's office, closes the door, and proceeds to have an hour-long chat about the lack of respect that my boss had treated me, and by extension my mother with. After a while, I get called into the office with the 2 of them, and the boss tells us again why the company could not give us the money that was due. After which my mother ended the conversation with one last grand statement. She stood up, said, "Well, when you treat people like shit." She lifted up the side of her shirt, unscrewed the cap to the colostomy bag, and dumped the contents directly onto the boss's desk, splattering everywhere, including on him, his keyboard, computer monitor, all the papers on his desk, and running over the edge between his legs. My mother then very calmly screwed the cap back on the bag, tucked it back under her shirt, and walked out the door. Both the boss and I were stunned speechless. After 10 to 15 seconds of awed silence, the smell hits us, and it's bad. The boss looks at me and says, "Clean this up," to which I reply, "Nope, what goes around, comes around." And I left the building laughing hysterically as all the other employees looked on in horror as the boss walked out of his office with a perfect line of splattered sheet across his mid-chest. I imagine my parents dying periodically to prepare myself for if I lose one or both of them. This sounds more normal if you consider that my dad has always been at a delicate age during my life and is a senior, and my mom, who is relatively young and about 16 years younger than my dad and very healthy, although a good driver, has somehow gotten into multiple near-death or serious car accidents and would sometimes threaten suicide. So, from a young age, I imagined finding them dead one day or something like that. It would make me very sad. Recently, my mom died in a car accident. I cried and still do from time to time, but even I know that I'm doing much better than everyone else, like my dad and her boyfriend. I find that, although I miss her, I do not find myself breaking down at the thought of her, and I'm able to accept the fact that I will never see her again. I like to think it was because I prepared myself for this exact thing. Interesting fact, about 3 days before my mom died in the car crash, we had a very nice walk, and I said I'd be fine, no matter what will happen to me from now on. I meant it then and still do. I told her I had already had such an unbelievably lucky childhood that I was prepared for whatever would happen. I had already experienced enough joy for one lifetime. After telling her this, I had a sudden vision of my dad, my mom, and me in my dad's car, and as we were driving, the car suddenly flipped over. Somehow, I knew only my mom had died in that imaginary crash, and that my dad and I were fine. I find it interesting that in my vision I was sitting behind my dad instead of my mom. I lived mostly with my mom. My parents are divorced, and almost always sat behind her in a car wherever she sat, but in the vision I sat behind my dad and now I live with him. Also, in my vision, we were very close to the place where my mom's final unfortunate crash happened. Getting a restraining order from my former mentor, who I lived with, super huge celebrity music video director, the biggest. I cannot walk into a grocery store without hearing at least one hit he's done. He has a massive Napoleon complex and seemed jealous that people on the internet had far more interest in me than him despite his fame. He even did a bigamma on here, and people asked about me and it obviously drove him nuts. Anyway, I called him out on his own bullshit and called him a bitch, then proceeded to ML everything his friends and girlfriend were hiding from him. I knew I wouldn't get away clean. My friends called me paranoid. I knew something was coming. Sure enough, I get a really great offer and go to meet the client at Starbucks. A restraining order bigger than a Bible was thrown onto the table with a weird broken delivery lawyer's assistant scurrying away. I threw my head back and laughed, unsurprised. I had zero repercussions after repeatedly breaking the restraining order. The celebrity director asked for his legal fees to be paid and for me to be punished. The fees exceeded $20,000. The judge said no. To lessons: never have a meeting at Starbucks, never have a faking meeting at Starbucks. It's for coffee. Private property only to conduct business. Also, probably don't tell your former mentor the details you know about his tiny cork via his tired girlfriend. #LESSONS. I also got away with the full volume cackle as he was exited court. Yes, I'm bragging. He was a very petty man, so I saw it coming. At my work, there are lots of things that can go wrong and lots of setting you can adjust to solve them or break everything. After a month of being called at all hours of the day and night and weekend to solve problem, I decided to sit down and spent a week coming up with a flowchart of everything that can go wrong. After the flowchart was put in place, I still received call because apparently people have trouble reading, and since this place was a revolving door of new hire, explaining was troublesome. So I wrote a script that executed the flowchart to the letter. So when I received a call, instead of explaining everything, I just said click X button. 8 months later, new executive get hired. He noticed the system I put in place. He called me in his office and asked, how many calls have you received for you to put that in place? I said, I'm not sure, most days. He paid me 1 hour of overtime for each day of the year. He took the flowchart and modified it into a mandatory training manual and made the script part of the operation interface. Also gave me a promotion. I know stories of asshole boss and incompetent corporate are more juicy, but I overthink every part of my job and some guy saw its potential. With all the money he gave me, including the promotion, it was very cheap for them to get such a system. So yeah, my advice is, learn coding and automate your job. If your company fire you for it, they are dumb as fuck. I have rules about transport trucks and buses. They tend to piss off other drivers or make my passengers question what the fuck I'm doing. But I got enough thumbs up from Mac drivers to know I'm doing the right thing. My biggest rule is, don't pass a transport truck at the same time as the vehicle ahead of you. There's plenty of space for 3 vehicles next to a Mac, but if one of them swerves, you're all dead. Often this happens in the fast lane, and as holes behind me honk to speed up and pass the Mac. They can fake and wait 8 seconds. Second is stay either behind or ahead of a transport truck who is in another lane. Don't drive next to them unless passing, and especially don't stick around in their blind spot. If you can't see the driver in his side mirrors, chances are he can't see you. The amount of times I've seen people get forced into the shoulder or ditch by a trucker or bus who didn't see them sitting in the blind spot for 15 minutes. When you do need to pass a Mac, do it fast, and don't pull ahead of them again until you're far ahead of them, so they don't have to brake to not crush your ass. Lastly, and this comes from growing up in Northern Ontario, where logging truck accidents are common, but somehow people still drive like idiots. Don't stay behind a logging truck longer than you have to, and don't faking tailgate any flatbed or logger. That's asking for a beheading. Or the wash treatment. Don't be a leaf on the wind. All of these things have given me plenty of time to swerve or stop before hitting other vehicles who are not following these rules. My kids think I'm a badass, but really, I just drive smart. The pandemic, specifically the food and toilet paper shortages in the beginning. In January 2020, I noticed what was going on in China with COVID, specifically that they were welding people into their own homes to try and contain the virus. I thought, maybe I should bulk up on food and supplies. A friend of mine laughed at the idea, so I did a cost-benefit analysis. What's the downside to buying extra canned food, meat to freeze, and long-term food items? The extra food cuts into our budget more, but not by much, and we would need to eat at home a bit extra if the COVID thing turns out not to be a big deal in the States. What's the upside? My family won't starve in an emergency. It was the easiest cost-benefit analysis I've ever done. DW and I spent January and the first part of February expanding all our food and supplies, so we could live for several months on what we had, and replaced anything we used in February and March. You know the rest. March hits and we are all stuck at home, and a lot of folks can't get enough food or toilet paper. My family had plenty, because I stocked up when everything was plentiful and easy to renew. When the pandemic hit, we didn't leave our house for groceries for 2 months, and that was mostly to get some fresh fruit. We also were able to help neighbors during the toilet paper shortage. It was an easy thing to prepare for with no downside, and I only did it because I'm an overthinker with this sort of thing. I'm a pharmacist and I used to work in a hospital. Now, hospital dress codes are weird. Most places make everyone wear scrubs, except the pharmacist. For some reason, I honestly don't know why, we're generally allowed to wear slacks and a shirt, so I did. We also don't get a ton of patient interaction, but sometimes we'll go rounding with the doctors. It's getting much more common. It's fun and it makes us available for drug questions. Well, I got to thinking and thought, what if, during rounds, one of these patients vomits on you? What will you do then? So I started keeping a change of clothes in my desk drawer in the pharmacy. This paid off, but not how I thought. Warning, the next part is sad. During rounds one day we were seeing a patient. She was a lovely woman, about 45 years old, mother of 3. I knew her. The doctor knew her. We all knew her, because she was a nurse that worked with us. A damn fine nurse too. She had thrown a pulmonary embolism, and was in the ICU on a heparin drip. Heparin is used to clear clots, which a pulmonary embolism is. She'd been there for a few days, and was starting to improve. Things were looking good. While we were in her room discussing what her treatment course was going to look like, her oxygen levels dropped. Then her heart rate dropped. Then she coded. During codes, pharmacists man the drug cart, so I grabbed the crash cart and got the epinephrine ready. In the 20 seconds it took me to do that, she had started to fountain blood out of her mouth. Her lung vasculature was damaged by the clot and had ruptured. The heparin didn't help. Side note, medically, we didn't do anything wrong. We followed treatment guidelines. Sometimes, shit happens and it's really unfair and shitty. We did CPR for a long time, I forget how long, but it was at least 36 minutes, because we went through 12 EPIs, and you give them every 3 to 5 minutes. We gave her protamine too, which reverses heparin. In the end, there wasn't anything we could do. She bled too fast. Anyway, at some point in all that I ended up with blood on my pants and shirt, so I was grateful for my change of clothes. That's a lot. It's the first time I've told this story, other than to my wife. It was one of the most horrible things I've ever seen, and was deeply unfair. In my country we have a big graduation test at the end of high school that determines if we are allowed to graduate and go to college or not. A bit so I wrote my bitter exams, and when the results were out everyone got called into the principal's office separately. Most of my classmates passed their tests, and while I was very excited I also repeatedly told myself you could have failed too, just keep that in mind. So my name was called, and I went in, and as you might have guessed I got the news that I failed. Being prepared for that, I calmly nodded, took the documents that showed my grades, and went to the office of the teachers that schedule the second tests. When I met other students waiting before that office I even grinned. Did you cheat into your exam too? Me too. And those who weren't crying laughed back. I scheduled the second test, that was in 3 days. I'd have to learn the subjects of 3 semesters in these 3 days, so I stormed home and learned like a maniac, rage-tidied my room and hyper-focused on nothing but the learning subjects. After I took the second exam I was told that I made it this time and was allowed to graduate. Before handing me the bitter documents my principal said, "Finally you are showing emotion." I was laughing and jumping. "You were the only one who didn't cry when I told you that you failed at first." I said something like crying wouldn't have helped anyway, but actually it was all because I already expected my failure and therefore could act immediately without wasting any time to mourn. What we learn from this? Low expectations can really help whenever shit goes down LMAO. We got some MPLS, multi-protocol label switching, training because the company was already in the process of implementing it in a large ISP. The protocol was still in draft, but Cisco and Juniper both had implementations with minor differences. According to the protocol, the MPLS encapsulation between the penultimate router and the endpoint would use label 0. Cisco found this redundant, and so their implementation just stripped the MPLS encapsulation and forwarded the traffic using the IGP, Interior Gateway Protocol, usually OSPF or ISIS. Juniper followed the draft more closely and used label 0. So I started thinking if this might cause any weird issues with our network, since we used both Juniper and Cisco routers, but it was just a thought experiment, and if they did it right, shouldn't really cause any big issues, at least from what I could figure out. I was just a tier 1 tech, and taking pretty basic training, so what do I know? Anyway, a few months later I came back from breakfast, worked graveyard shift, and saw like 5 of our tier 3 techs all standing around someone's terminal in the NOC. I was friends with them, so I went and asked what was up. They have cubicles outside the NOC, so if they were in there, they were working on something, and if they were gathered around someone's terminal, there was a problem. Turns out 2 MPLS tunnels were acting like they were equal cost paths when they should have different metrics. Just know that equal cost paths was not a good thing. It was causing problems. They had both Cisco and Juniper support teams on the phone and both were denying it was their issue. Spent a few minutes there while they were troubleshooting, went to my desk and logged into the head-end router and checked out both paths. Thought about it for another few minutes and then came back and told them I figured it out. They weren't very receptive at first. 5 tier 3 techs working on it for about a half hour so far, and a tier 1 guy figures it out that fast. They were skeptical. But I drew up a simplified diagram on a piece of paper and showed them what I thought was happening. The penultimate router on one link was Cisco, the penultimate router on the other link was Juniper, and the endpoint router was also Cisco. I reasoned that the endpoint Cisco was counting the metric to the Juniper twice, once on the MPLS encapsulation and again after it removed the encapsulation, because the Cisco was expecting the MPLS tunnel to be sending the data over ISIS. So they thought that made some sense and brought it up to Cisco's TAC team. Later Cisco confirmed the bug and created a patch. I love traveling and seeing the world. I'm one of those get through security as soon as possible and find my plane's gate once I'm through. Then I settle down and browse shops or grab a tea at a cafe. My partner is the most laid-back airport traveler going. He just skinks through with not a care in the world, which is cool. He does his way, I do my way. Sometimes we'll agree to meet at the other side of security, lol. Back in 2016 me, my partner and two of our mates went to America to visit my partner's family. We found decent flights that took us from the UK to Denmark, which let us meet up with one of our friends, then onwards to America. I had the psyche feeling that our flight from the UK to Denmark would get cancelled, so I double checked terms and conditions and made sure we were staying at a friend's house who was equal distance between two airports. Whilst everyone slept like normal people, chuckling at my paranoia, my insomniac stayed up and planned out exactly how we would get to each airport, which flights would still allow for the connection in Denmark and so on. Lo and behold, at 2:30 am I get a notification. Your flight is cancelled due to mechanical issues. You can get this alternative flight at airport B. Flight is at 7 am. I called a taxi, asked for the price, and if they could get to our place within half an hour and do the 2-hour drive to the airport. Woke up my partner and friend and said, get your sheet together, the taxi is outside. Our plane was cancelled. Poor lads were mildly confused, but got up, and we got in the taxi and to the airport. Through security and near our gates by 6 am. Informed our other mate that we'd meet them in the airport at an earlier time. Everyone was mildly impressed by my forethought, but still think I overthink for traveling, lol. But we got a lovely 3-week vacation and no issues on the way back. For the last couple of years I have been experiencing what has been called the 11:11 phenomenon, being drawn to look at the clock at that time and or 11 after the hour, all day, every day. I eventually found out others are also experiencing this. This is a website I came across while trying to find some understanding of what was very perplexing at first. Many people from all walks of life have begun to see 11:11 in various places, especially on their digital clocks, phones, and computers. As this begins to happen more frequently, many of us may begin to ask ourselves, what does this mean, and why am I seeing this now? This synchronicity usually provokes the person who is noticing this phenomenon to search for answers or to feel they are being guided by angels or a supernatural force. Because people can begin to wake in the night to see some of these number combinations, it is also linked to being a wake-up call. https://omtimes.com/ For me, this experience has coincided with coming across the following, which confirmed my spiritual beliefs. Prophecy is about 1/4 of the Bible letting us know what will happen in the future. Jesus stated in John 14:29, and now I have told you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe. And it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God, I will pour out of my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Acts 2:17. These are two spaces I have created that covers a good portion of what I have come across over the last couple of years concerning the last days we are living in, and how to have hope about the future. God bless r/prophecy_watcher, r/astronomy biblical. This is a bit different from the other answers here. I always wore a hoodie and used to walk around on campus with my hands in the pocket. During the winter months, there would be a lot of ice, and my overthinking went something like this: if I slip, I doubt I'll get my hands out of this pocket fast enough to catch myself. I could wear gloves and leave my hands out, but I don't really want to. If I fall forward, I can probably catch myself with my forehead if I do it just right. Obviously, if I continued thinking, I would have realized how stupid that was. At the time it sounded like a great idea that would totally work. So I never slipped on campus, but some friends and I were horsing around on the ice in a frozen pool. Of course my hands are in my hoodie pocket. I go to shoulder bump one of them, and they push back a little and my feet start sliding. I'm falling face first and my hands do not move. I recall my genius idea coming back to me and land directly on my forehead. The collective gasp from all my friends when I stood up is something I'll always remember. I split my forehead from brow to brow and had to be in a Christmas play that year with stitches in my face. Now I have a scar between my brows that makes me look like I'm always scowling. At least I got to test my theory, I guess. Moral: even though you overthink something or make up scenarios in your head, that doesn't mean that you always come to the right conclusions. We don't get a ton of power outages, but when they happen it can be out for a few days. My parents were the ones that told me to take precautions when a storm was coming, like filling the tub with water so you can flush a toilet. Necessary on a well where the power pumps the water. Now they do almost nothing to prepare. We also have storms that knock the power out predicted a week in advance, but people wait till the day before or day of to buy the ubiquitous bread and milk. Especially after reading some prepper books I liked, I decided to do more. Preppers get a bad rep as being crazy, but everyone needs to pick a level that works for them. Like the number of people in New Orleans that probably wished they had an inflatable boat in their attic. My preparation involves having a 20,000 mAh brick I drain and recharge every few months. I keep a couple of packs of beef jerky and bottled water that I rotate out every 6 months. When a storm is coming, I take a bath twice a day so that I'm never more than 12 hours from being fresh. I keep a Yeti full of ice and water. Last power outage, my family is beaching and complaining that they're bored and their phones are dead. I'm upstairs drinking cold water, snacking on jerky, and watching YouTube and Netflix. I was set for a long time. They still don't take precautions. As soon as the threat is over, they forget and do nothing. A plaintiff's lawyer screwed up filing a lawsuit by not filling out the proper cover sheets, so it wasn't technically filed by the statute of limitations, but he was able to convince the county clerk to backdate it when he figured out that he couldn't access the filing to issue summonses. Part of the record was a letter explaining that his initial filing was rejected because he couldn't fit the names of all the defendants in a required form without them being so small they were unreadable. Turns out he just needed to attach another form, provided by the court system, to name additional defendants. And also that the clerk is required to reject complaints that are not accompanied by the requisite forms. We filed a motion to dismiss on behalf of my client, and another very reputable firm filed a piggyback Me Too motion based on the statute of limitations. Opposing counsel never filed a response and the motions were set for a hearing. I was only there to cover the hearing and had no info on the case beyond the procedural posture, so I had to study up for the hearing. My co-defendant's counsel was a well-known and respected defense lawyer, and the judge picked him to go first at the hearing. He said his piece. Then opposing counsel brought up that the judicial form doesn't allow for more than one defendant argument. My co-defendant's counsel had a deer in the headlights moment briefly. Then I handed him the second page and whispered to him all this dickhead needed to do was fill out the second page. He screwed up in an extremely basic way, and the circuit clerk did exactly what we supposed to do. He proffered the second page as an exhibit, eloquently called him a dumbass, and sat down. When it was my turn, I said a very elaborate Me to the judge said it was one of the most eloquent Me Too arguments she'd heard, since it was my research that yielded the result. Case dismissed. My co-defendant's counsel still thinks I'm smart as shit for anticipating an easy argument. Was ready for the pandemic. Been warning my classes about bird flu for years. Showed Contagion every year. Heard the first rumors out of Wuhan in late December of 2019. As soon as school opened up after the new year, I warned colleagues and students that a pandemic was on its way, more so as I heard second-hand stories from friends and in-laws in China. I correctly predicted the week the first confirmed cases of COVID would show up in the US. Loaded up on N95 masks and storable food before others did, or in the case of masks, ran out. No toilet paper problems in our house, lol. I had my students sanitizing their desks regularly with supplies I or they brought in since the beginning of 2020, so when the school finally closed I had plenty of sanitizing ingredients to bring back home. My students were well advised on how to prepare for the pandemic, and I know many did share that information with their families and acted accordingly. I had already brought home anything I thought I might need to teach remotely, and that was also a good decision. Just days before we closed, the principal looked at me in a planning committee meeting and wanted me to sort of agree with him that we were most likely to be closed for a rather short time, but I said that we would close soon and probably not reopen the rest of the spring semester. I was right, unfortunately.